Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Hinata becomes possessive of Naruto during the Academy Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Naruto yawned as he walked into the classroom. He had overslept due to an alarm clock malfunction, and lateness was the absolute last thing he needed. He had been given the title of genin through highly unusual and controversial means, and being late spit in the face of the man who had made the promotion a reality. How is it that I'm still exhausted even though I overslept? Naruto wondered to himself as he sat down in one of the few open seats available in the room. After several minutes of waiting, Irika, who was the academy instructor, cleared his throat and gave the group of children a hard stare in order to gain their attention and silence them. Now that everybody is here, we can get started with team assignments. Before we do that, you should all know what exactly is going to change about your lives now that you're ninja of the Hidden Leaf Village, he began. A murmur rippled through the new batch of genin as they pondered the meaning behind their now former teacher's words. First of all, you will be expected to take complete and total responsibility for anything and everything you do from here on out. Despite your ages, you're effectively working-class citizens now, meaning that you will bear the expectations of an adult. You will still be given more leeway than, say, a chunin, but punishments will not be withheld simply because you're children. Secondly, you will now be more or less in charge of your own income. Many of you have parents that can and will assist you with such things, but they still have no real control over what you do with the money you earn, he continued. The class all made a sound of approval at the explanation of their newfound economic freedom. Irika sighed inwardly as he watched them react. Lastly, at some point during your career as a ninja, and almost certainly more than once, you will be forced to murder. You will have blood on your hands whether you want to or not. Depressing as it is, that's the long and short of it. Now, on to cell assignments, he concluded. The jovial mood that had permeated the classroom vanished at the final section of Irika's speech and was replaced with a melancholy silence. One by one, Irika listed of teams. After 6 uninteresting cells, Team 7 was announced. Team 7 will consist of Naruto Uzumaki, Irika said. The blonde glanced up from his desk and awaited the identities of his 2 teammates. Shikamaru Nara, the instructor, continued. Naruto felt his spirits heighten slightly. He had never known the lazy Nara well, but he had never been outwardly unpleasant as many of the Uzumaki's classmates had been. And Hinata Hyuga. Your Jonin instructor will be Kakashi Hatake, Irika concluded. Naruto glanced up to the far left corner of the room where the Hyuga heiress was sitting. Her posture was perfect, her clothes were ironed and clean, her eyes were sharp and attentive, and while her appearance was certainly an acquired taste, she was undeniably attractive. A true symbol of the high standards set by her family, the illustrious Hyuga clan. I just had to end up with the other rich kid, didn't I? Naruto grumbled within his mind. Irika went on to announce the remaining cells, with the notable ones being teams 10 and 8, consisted of Choji, Ino, and Kiba, and Sasuke, Shino, and Sakura respectively. At least I don't have to deal with Sasuke. I did miss out on Sakura-chan, though the Uzumaki thought with mixed feelings. After the assignments were complete, the classroom began to empty, leaving nobody but Team 7, who had been ordered to remain in the room by Irika in order to await the arrival of Kakashi. So, what do you think of this whole ninja thing? Naruto asked Shikamaru, who was staring out the window as he always did. The young Nara glanced at the blonde out of the corner of his eyes and sighed. It sounds like a hell of a lot of work. Kind of a drag if you ask me, he replied in standard fashion. The Uzumaki chuckled and looked to Hinata, who was reading a book. What about you? He asked. The heiress closed her book and stared down at Naruto, a look of subtle disdain in her pale, assessing eyes. I consider ninjahood to be a great honor. An opportunity to uphold my clan's reputation, if you will. Although, the circumstances and environment in which I will be forced to accomplish that goal aren't exactly ideal, she said, never blinking as she stared at the blonde. Shikamaru made a noise of protest, easily deciphering the meaning of statement. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows and frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. Shikamaru opened his mouth to explain, but stopped when somebody walked into the classroom. Team 7 looked to the door of the room, where a man with silver hair and a covered eye stood. So, I guess you 3 are going to be my team. Nara, Hyuga, and whoever the hell Blondie is. Works for me. Come to the roof. We're going to run through some introductions, he said, vanishing in a puff of smoke once he had finished his final sentence. The genin all stood up from their seats and walked out of the classroom. Naruto studied his teammates as he walked alongside them. Shikamaru slouched as he walked, and yawned almost periodically. He was the polar opposite of Hinata, who stood up straight and took measured, efficient steps. Her movements were clearly rehearsed and well-groomed. Naruto had never spoken a word to Hinata, the brief exchange of words in the classroom having been their first conversation, but he knew one thing for sure despite their limited interactions. He disliked her strongly. Kakashi flipped through the pages of his orange-colored book as he awaited the arrival of his genin. It had been roughly 3 minutes, and they had not made it to the roof. I really need to show them how to use Shunshin sometime, he thought to himself. Then, as if his silent prayers were being answered, the group of genin arrived on the roof, all of them looking quite bored and tired. Kakashi shut his book and set it aside. Now that you're all here, let's get down to what I called you all up here for. Each of us is going to say our name, the things we like, the things we dislike, your goals, that kind of thing, he explained. The group gave a collective nod. The Jonin looked to Shikamaru. Start us off, Nara, he said. The lazy genin sighed and rubbed his eyes as he gathered his thoughts. My name is Shikamaru Nara, and I like shogi, clouds, naps, and not much else. I dislike tests, exercise, and waking up early. My goal is to have an average wife, maybe a 7 out of 10 or so, 2 kids, a passable, but not overly impressive income, and I want to die at the age of 80, he explained tiredly. Kakashi scratched the back of his head and chuckled. Don't be too ambitious, kid. You might disappoint yourself, he said humorously. He then pointed to Naruto. You next, Blondie, he said. The Uzumaki nodded and sat up a bit straighter as he prepared his improvised speech. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I like ramen, weekends, and training. I dislike waiting for my food, stuck-up pricks, and just bullies in general. My goal is to be Hokage. That way, you people will have to respect me, whether you want to or not, he explained. Kakashi nodded and smiled behind his mask as he reminisced about an old friend. He then motioned to Hinata, who was patiently awaiting her time to speak. Your turn, Hyuga, he said. The heiress stretched and eyed every person on the roof, seemingly to make sure they were all listening. My name is Hinata Hyuga, and I like things such as gardening, quiet nights, and dango. On occasion. I dislike spicy food, simpletons, and inefficient taijutsu. My goal is to lead my clan as I see fit, she said, glancing at Naruto at the word simpleton. What about you? Naruto asked the Jonin. Kakashi sighed and slapped Shikamaru on the back of the head to wake him from a nap he had decided to take. My name is Kakashi Hataki. I like some things, and dislike others. As for my goals, I guess I've never really thought about it. I'm more of now kind of guy, he said. The Uzumaki frowned and pointed an accusing finger at the silver-haired ninja. That's not fair. You didn't tell us anything about you other than your name, he said. Kakashi shrugged and stood up. Unlike you, I have no obligation to tell you anything. I'm the authority. You're all free for the rest of the day, by the way. Be at the training grounds at 7 sharp tomorrow. The second phase of your genin exam will take place there. Don't eat tomorrow morning either. You'll just end up puking, he said before vanishing as he had in the classroom. I'm going home. See you guys tomorrow, Shikamaru said immediately after the Jonin had disappeared. He then made his way down from the roof and down to the streets, beginning his trek home. Naruto glanced at Hinata, who was wearing a look of irritation. What's got you so bothered? He asked. The heiress glanced at him, and then looked in the direction Shikamaru had walked. Both our sensei and our teammate are lazy fools. Then there's you, an outcast and easily the worst student in our academy's history, only rivaled by Choji Akimichi. To say that I'm displeased with myself would be an understatement, she said. The blonde prickled at her words. Cry me a river, princess. I get that you're from the most famous clan in the village, but that doesn't make you any better than we are, he said defiantly. Hinata scoffed, and turned to leave the roof. Oh, I think you'll find that a chasm exists between you and I. Social classes exist for a reason, Uzumaki-san, and you and I are of different levels, she said. Naruto growled as she made her way down the stairs and into the building once more. You aren't better than me. I'll show you. Kakashi knocked on the door of Hiruzen's office and waited. After several moments of silence, a call of confirmation could be heard from within the room, prompting the Jonin to enter. Once inside, he closed the door and sighed, earning an eyebrow raise from the elderly Kage. You look exhausted. I know that you dislike genin for the most part, but they don't usually tire you out, the Hokage said somewhat humorously. Kakashi sighed and sat himself down on a chair in front of the old man's desk. What on earth was your thought process when putting the cells together? My team has no chemistry, he asked. Hiruzen thought back to the many nights he spent meticulously planning the arrangements of the genin teams. They do have chemistry, it will certainly take some time for it to become tangible, but it does exist, he replied. The silver-haired ninja snorted. Naruto is, for lack of a better word, a dunce. Shikamaru is about as driven as a middle-aged alcoholic, and Hinata is about as Hyuga as you can get. That is not a compatible group of personalities. I don't care what you say, Hokage-sama, he countered tiredly. The old man gave Kakashi a hard stare. This team isn't entirely dissimilar from Team Minato, if you think about it. Rin was, unlike Shikamaru, very driven, but you weren't all too different from Hinata in your younger days, and the similarities between Obito and Naruto are numerous and uncanny. The only real difference between your cell and this one is that you're taking on Minato's role, he said. The Jonin opened his mouth to respond, but shut it when he found that he had nothing more to say. He then stood up from his chair and turned to exit the room. Either way, I doubt they'll pass the test. The biggest difference between my team and this one is that I'm a harsher teacher than Minato-sensei ever was. Hinata suppressed a yawn as she waited patiently in the training field Kakashi had ordered them to attend. It was 6:58 a.m., and neither of her teammates nor her sensei had arrived. Yet another reason that her placement was nonsensical. No sense of punctuality could be found within the psyches of her comrades. You're out early. Not all that surprising, I guess. The Hyuga heiress glanced over her shoulder and spotted Naruto making his way into the training ground, a tired look on his face. Hinata glanced at her pocket watch. 7 o'clock sharp. Just as he was instructed. So you are capable of following directions, Uzumaki-sen, she thought to herself. The blonde walked over to the girl and sat down 5 feet from her. Why'd he have to make us come out here so early? Wouldn't 8 o'clock have been better? That way we wouldn't be half asleep for this testing, he complained through a yawn. The Hyuga girl sighed inwardly. And of course, he complains. No work ethic whatsoever, she thought frustratedly. She then began counting in her head the number of seconds her remaining cohorts were late. Eventually, Shikamaru meandered his way into the field, looking even more exhausted than Naruto as he did so. 178 seconds. I expected something closer to 300. Not bad, Nara-sen, she thought to herself. After 10 more minutes, she gave up on counting for Kakashi. Okay, this is just stupid. He tells us to show up at 7 sharp, and he's not here yet. 7 o'clock was 10 minutes ago, Naruto grumbled. Hinata, for the first time since Team 7's formation, agreed with the excitable genin. You would think that a jonin would be, at the very least, capable of being on time. I suppose that we set out expectations a bit too high, she said. Shikamaru then laid down on the grass and closed his eyes. Well, since it seems like we have some time to kill, I'm gonna take a nap. Wake me when he gets here, he said. Before anybody Naruto or Hinata could respond, the shadow user began to snore. Maybe I should do that too. Seems like a good idea, the blonde said as he too began to lay down on the grass. Hinata shook her head. I would prefer if you didn't, Uzumaki-san, she said. Naruto raised an eyebrow and glanced at the Hyuga girl. Why's that? I thought you were displeased with us, or whatever. With both of us sleeping, you'd be free of us until Kakashi-sensei shows up, he said. Hinata frowned. Yes, I am quite displeased with this cell, and I would much prefer to be with another team, but the two of you more or less sleeping on the job lessens my view of you even further. Is that what you want, Uzumaki-san? She asked. Naruto burst out laughing, earning a questioning from the heiress. It's hilarious that you think I give a damn about what you think of me or this team. You're stuck with us whether you like it or not. Hell, since we're, a team, maybe you should follow our example and take a nap. You definitely need your beauty sleep, he retorted. Hinata felt her face burn at the comment. How dare you, she growled. The blonde chuckled at her obvious indignation and closed his eyes to sleep. Don't get so worked up. They say it makes you age faster, he said with a close-eyed grin. The heiress opened her mouth to berate him further, but closed it again when she realized he was asleep. How on earth do they do that? They just close their eyes, and then they fall asleep. Narcoleptics, the lot of them, she thought to herself. She studied the faces of her teammates, as they slept, and frowned. Why do men sleep with their mouths open, she wondered. Hinata, out of curiosity, activated her Byakugan to search for her behind-schedule sensei. Be it due to the limits of her extended vision, or the extent to which Kakashi was late, she could not locate him. Just as she was about to deactivate her dojutsu, she spotted something unusual. Why is Uzumaki-san's stomach glowing, she wondered. She focused her gaze on the blonde's abdomen and frowned. While not visible to the average person's eye, one with a Byakugan would be remiss to not notice the bright mass of bound chakra centered in the boy's stomach. It looks to be a seal. In fact, it appears to be in the pattern of the 8 trigrams. Why on earth does this cretin have such a complicated work of fuinjutsu on his body, she wondered to herself. Undressing him with your eyes, huh? Not what I expected to walk in on, but pretty funny either way. Hinata whipped around and saw Irika sitting on a nearby rock, a look of amusement on his scarred face. She looked back to Naruto and snorted. Not in 1,000 years. And if I ever did, he should be honored. It's not every day a lowlife like him is examined by a high-class citizen, she said haughtily. Irika chuckled and took a sip from a water canteen he had brought along. You might want to control your ego, Hinata. He's not as lowly as you seem to think he is. Neither is Shikamaru. I think you'll be surprised by how well they do during this test Kakashi has put together for you, he said. The Hyuga girl raised an eyebrow. What do you know about him? She asked skeptically, gesturing to Naruto. Her former instructor smiled as he thought back to the night of Naruto's promotion OT Genin. Much more than you do. I won't deny that his scores were abysmal. He was called dead last for a reason, but he's not an idiot, not really, he replied. Hinata deactivated her Byakugan and sat down on the ground. I'll be the judge of that. I've heard that Nara-san is actually quite intelligent, so I have high hopes for him as a teammate, but the same can't be said for my feelings regarding Uzumaki-san, she said. Iruka sighed and stood up from the rock he was sitting on, turning to leave the training ground. Don't judge a book by its cover, Hinata. I think you'll find that you've been given a good pair of teammates, he said before disappearing into a puff of smoke. The heiress shook her head and sighed. She glanced back at Naruto, whose mouth was still open as he slept. You somehow find ways to be irritating even while you're asleep, Uzumaki-san. Color me impressed, she thought to herself. She then reached forward and pressed the bottom of the blonde's chin upward, closing his mouth. The heiress infused a bit of chakra into his jaw to ensure his mouth stayed closed. She smiled triumphantly when his jaw stayed locked. That takes care of that. Kakashi rubbed his exposed eye as he entered the training grounds. He was nearly an hour late, but he had an excuse prepared, as he always did. Once he was fully within the field, his team became visible. All three were awake, with Naruto rubbing his jaw for whatever reason, and Shikamaru looking as exhausted as he always did. Hinata, as per usual, was waiting attentively. Yo. Sorry for the long wait. I ran into an old buddy of mine who needed help cleaning out his rain gutters, he lied. Based upon the looks on the faces of his genin, none of them believed his story. Now that we're all here, I'll explain your test. This will be the true genin exam, so you'd better pay attention, he said. All three children, Hinata included, gave him a look of confusion and disbelief. What? I thought we became genin when we performed the clone jutsu, Shikamaru said. Kakashi shook his head, feeling a limited degree of sympathy for the group. That test was simply an entrance exam. You gained the right to attempt to become genin. You still have one more test, he explained. Hinata then motioned for him to continue. The jonin produced a pair of bells and presented them to the group. You're going to be trying to take these bells from me. Capturing a bell ensures your position on this team, he explained. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows. But there are only 2 bell. There are 3 of us, he pointed out. The silver-haired ninja shrugged and attached the bells to his belt. I guess you'll just have to work extra hard if you want to be a ninja. There are 27 graduates this year, and based on previous years, only 9 of them will pass their true exam. The percentage of students who fail this test is 66%, he said. The group all gave a collective gasp at the revelation. After they calmed themselves down, Kakashi stepped back and took out his orange book. Alright, we should get started. We don't have all day. You have exactly 4 hours to take these bells from me, he said. The group nodded and awaited the signal to begin. After several tense moments, the jonin nodded and motioned for them to attack. Naruto, being quite impatient by nature, made a hand seal. 4 doppelgangers of himself appeared. This shouldn't be that hard, he said obliviously. He and his clones then charged Kakashi, who had not glanced up from his book. As the multiple copies Naruto reached him, the silver-haired ninja effortlessly dodged their attacks, destroying 2 of the 4 in a single motion that was too fast for the blonde to detect with his eyes. Shadow clones? That's impressive. Most Chunin can't use that technique, Kakashi complimented as he casually maneuvered around Naruto and his clones. Why the hell are you reading a book during a fist fight? The excitable genin demanded as he was matadored time and time again. Kakashi responded by destroying the remaining pair of clones with a single shuriken. Because I can do both. Multitasking is an important skill, he said as he turned a page. Naruto growled and swung a right-handed punch at his teacher's head. Kakashi leaned back, causing the punch to miss by inches. He then countered with a hard, rising knee to the genin's jaw, buckling his legs and sending him reeling back. Surprisingly, Kakashi did pursue the stunned boy, instead opting to continue reading his book. It was unwise to attack him so recklessly, Uzumaki-san. Although, your ability to use the shadow clone jutsu will certainly be useful, Hinata said as Naruto climbed to his feet. She then stepped forward. I would like to try my hand at fighting him, she said, assuming her stance as she spoke. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's a good idea? Sounds detrimental to your health if you asked me, he said. The heiress smirked and charged forward at Kakashi. The jonin glanced up from his book and sidestepped her charge. To his surprise, the Hyuga girl pivoted and adjusted her trajectory. She launched a palm strike at his chest, forcing him to evade. I can't afford to read with this one, it seems, Kakashi thought to himself. He closed his book and focused on Hinata. He stood his ground as she approached and pulled his head to the left, allowing a palm strike to whiz past his face. He intercepted her forward movement with a short punch to her nose that she ran face first into. Hinata froze in place upon absorbing the strike, allowing the silver-haired ninja to follow up with a kick to her chest that launched her back toward her teammates. She crashed into Naruto, sending them both to the ground. He reached for his book, but found that he no longer had control of his body. I honestly can't believe that worked. Kakashi glanced over his shoulder and sighed. Shikamaru had made his way behind him during his scuffle with Hinata and connected his shadow to the Jonins. The lazy genin slowly made his way to Kakashi, forcing the silver-haired ninja to walk towards him as well. Once they were within arm's length of one another, Shikamaru reached for the bells. Before he could touch them, however, his arm was seized by Kakashi. That was clever. I'm impressed, Shikamaru. The one thing you failed to consider, though, is that the shadow possession technique can be broken if the difference in strength between the victim and caster is large enough, the Jonin said. He then spun the Nara around by his wrists and threw him at his teammates. Unlike Hinata, Shikamaru was caught by Naruto and set down without slamming into the hard field ground. You almost had him, Shikamaru. If she and I can keep him occupied, we can take those bells, Naruto said as the shadow user dusted himself off. I doubt the same tactic will work twice. This man is clearly adept and well-versed as a combatant. Either way, the fact still stands that there are only 2 bells, meaning that one of us will be sent back to the academy regardless, Hinata said. Shikamaru thought for a moment, studying Kakashi carefully. I don't think the point of this test is to actually capture the bells. It's a bit more complex than that. There are no 3-man cells in this village. All of them are 4-man. There's literally no way for us to take those bells from him. Hinata is pretty clearly the best fighter here, and she got her ass handed to her. He isn't even trying all that hard either, he said. The group all racked their brains. Teamwork. We have to work in tandem to show that we can function as a single unit on the battlefield, Hinata said. Naruto nodded in agreement. That sounds about right. I think we should still do what we can to try to get the bells, just to prove a point, he said. The team then discussed their plan of attack as Kakashi assessed them. The Jonin smiled to himself as they assumed their stances and turned their attention to him. Looks like I've got a group of sharp ones. This might be a little more fun than I thought it would be. Team 7 all dropped to their backs out of exhaustion. The 4-hour time limit had been reached, and they had never even come close to obtaining a bell, with the closest call being when Naruto had managed to touch one of them with his pinky. He's really strong. How the hell were we supposed to get one of those bells from him? Naruto asked through deep breaths. Hinata sat up and wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. Remember, the point was never to actually acquire one of the bells, but to simply push him. I think we may have accomplished at least that much, she said tiredly. Shikamaru rolled over onto his stomach and groaned. This was way too much work. I just want a nap, he grumbled. Naruto chuckled and struggled to his feet. Preaching to the choir, buddy. I could use a few hours of sleep myself, he said. A puff of smoke then erupted from the ground in front of them. From it emerged Kakashi. Well, you failed to capture even a single bell, which is disappointing, but your showing as a team was impressive nonetheless, he said with an approving nod. The children all felt a spark of hope. And as such, I think I'll take all 3 of you on as my genin team. Your tactics were a bit repetitive at times, but that can be fixed fairly easily. Congratulations, you 3. You're now officially members of Team 7, he said with a thumbs up. The genin collectively heaved a sigh of relief. As a reward for being my first team to pass, you have the rest of the day to yourselves. Have fun, it'll be your last day off for a while, he said before turning and walking away. Naruto stretched and glanced back at his teammates. Want to grab some lunch? I'll pay, he asked. Hinata shook her head and stood up, dusting herself off as she did so. I would rather not. I have something to attend to, she replied. She then walked past the blonde toward the village. The excitable genin looked to Shikamaru. What about you? He asked. The shadow user shrugged and nodded his head. He stood up and motioned for Naruto to lead the way. Yeah, sure. I haven't eaten since yesterday, he said. The boys then took off jogging back toward Konoha. For the first time in several years, Naruto ate lunch with a companion. Naruto sighed as he cleaned out the rain gutters on the roof of the Hokage building. D-rank missions had never sounded appealing, but this was nothing more than janitor's work. Something an already retired, elderly shinobi should be doing, not a group of, in the cases of Shikamaru and Hinata, clan heirs and heiresses. Despite the mundane nature of the missions, they were still a requirement. In order to participate in anything resembling a C or even B-ranked mission, a genin team had to complete 10 D-ranked missions at the bare minimum. What time is it? Naruto asked. Hinata pulled out her pocket watch and scowled at what she saw. Nearly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We've been here since 7 o'clock. Almost 4 hours of grunt work. This is just pathetic, she grumbled. Shikamaru chuckled as he cleaned out his section of the gutter. At least we're doing this on a dry day. If this had been last week, this would have been an all-day assignment. Look on the bright side for once, you two. All we have to do is work at this and we'll be done in no time, he said. Both Naruto and Hinata snorted. This coming from the person who had an even lower homework completion rate than Uzumaki-san. And that's really saying something, she retorted. The blonde scrunched up his nose. Did you have to insult me too? He asked irritatedly. The Hyuga heiress shrugged and shoveled out another glob of muck from the gutter. I'm simply stating facts. Neither you nor Nara-san were good students in the least. The fact that the two of you became genin is baffling to me. Your passing of the initial exam in particular, Uzumaki-san, is an indictment on the academy, she said bluntly. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Why's that? I think I know your answer, but I'd still like to hear it, he asked curiously. Hinata gestured to Shikamaru, who had completely detached himself from conversation as he sensed the rising tension. Nara-san passing makes logical sense if you look at it from a political perspective. He is the heir to the Nara family, a major clan in the pharmaceutical industry as well as wildlife preservation. Had he not passed, there would have been uproar from his family. The academy is very conflict-averse, so his promotion to genin was an inevitability. You, though, Uzumaki-san, have no such family lineage to speak of. In fact, you have no family to speak of at all, to my knowledge, she began. Shikamaru frowned and looked up from his gutter, suddenly quite invested in the conversation at hand. Furthermore, there is not a single citizen of this village, save for Irika Yumino, that views you in a positive light. Our walk to the Hokage building is proof of that fact. You're an outcast of the highest caliber, she said coldly. Shikamaru scowled and glared at Hinata. This is going too far, Hinata, he warned. Despite the shadow user's words, the Hyuga heiress continued her insensitive speech. If I had to guess, Irika felt sympathy for you, wondering why the village as a whole seems to detest you, and gave you a promotion out of the goodness of his heart. If he had stopped to consider simple logic, he would realize that the vote of the majority outweighs that of the outlier. The result of that metaphorical vote is that you, Naruto Uzumaki, are not worth anybody's time, including mine, she concluded. Shikamaru's mouth hung open in shock at her words. That was completely uncalled for, he said. He took a step forward, but was stopped by Naruto, who put up a hand. It's fine, Shikamaru. She isn't exactly wrong. Let's just keep working. None of us want to be here anyway, so we should pick up the pace, he said quietly. The team worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, finishing the job at 3 o'clock. They made their way down from the roof once the assignment was complete and entered the building to collect their pay. The silence remained until they were intercepted by Kakashi, who had been waiting for them in the lobby of the building since the beginning of the gutter cleaning. That took a little longer than I thought it would, but you finished before dark, meaning we probably have time to get in some light sparring, he said. He gestured for the genin to follow him, an order that the children followed. The jonin lead them back to the same training ground at which they had taken the bell test. I'm going to evaluate your current levels of proficiency in taijutsu. You'll each be sparring both of your teammates once. Naruto, you'll be sparring Shikamaru first, he ordered. The boys nodded and assumed their stances. You may begin whenever you like, Kakashi said. Naruto, as expected, led the dance, charging forward with a flurry of punches and kicks. Shikamaru sighed and moved away from the blonde, allowing himself to only be grazed by 1 or 2 odd strikes. The Nara eventually stood his ground and swung back with a right-handed punch, which connected right between Naruto's eyes. They've definitely got the spirit, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, Kakashi muttered. He glanced at Hinata, whose face was contorted in displeasure. They're completely amateurish. They fall over their own feet, there's no real weight behind their strikes, and they have no semblance of defense, she said. The silver-haired jonin shrugged. Neither one of them has been given formal training in taijutsu beyond what the academy taught them, and most of what you learn in the academy isn't applicable in the real world, he said. The pair watched the sloppy match for several more minutes before Kakashi commented once more. You have to give it to Naruto, though. He's clearly less coordinated than Shikamaru, but he's completely tireless. He's taking it to him right now, he said as the blonde connected with 3 hard punches to the body and head of the Nara. Hinata nodded in agreement. His stamina is remarkable, and his durability is nonsensical. The number of clean punches he's absorbed without blinking is frankly amazing. Given training, he could be quite good at this, she said. Just as she finished her sentence, Naruto sent Shikamaru to the ground with a hard punch to the left side of his jaw. Kakashi immediately leapt between the boys. That's enough, you two. The winner is Naruto, he said. The blonde helped his teammate to his feet and smiled. You're annoying as hell to fight. You might have loosened one of my teeth, he said. Shikamaru chuckled and made his way over to Kakashi. Hinata, meanwhile, had made her way to Naruto and was awaiting instructions from the jonin. You may both begin, the silver-haired ninja called after a minute or 2 of silence. Naruto wasted no time in attacking his teammate. Unlike Shikamaru, Hinata did not take a step backward in response to his forward charge. Instead, she mirrored the action and moved forward. When they collided, Naruto missed badly with a right-handed punch. Hinata countered the strike with a palm strike to the arm that he had attempted to strike her with. The blonde felt the limb go numb immediately. He immediately disengaged and cradled the arm gently. Okay, what the hell was that? He demanded. The Hyuga heiress responded to his question by pushing forward and striking him 3 more times, this time to his ribcage. Naruto coughed painfully, a bit of blood pooling in his mouth. Instead of cowering to the discomfort, he clenched his jaw and swung back, missing badly and absorbing a hard counter to the side of his face. She's carving him up. This is a mismatch, Shikamaru said as Hinata pummeled the excitable genin. Kakashi nodded and winced as Naruto was buckled by a kick to the right side of his neck. Her clan specializes in taijutsu, so there was never any chance of Naruto being competitive with her at this point, he said. Naruto was then knocked down 3 consecutive times, all with the same counter. Kakashi sighed and stepped in to halt the match. That's it. I've seen enough. The winner is Hinata, he said. The Hyuga girl offered no hand of assistance to her fallen teammate, instead opting to watch him struggle to his feet. Use the left side of your body, Uzumaki-san, she said once he was up to his feet. The blonde frowned and rubbed his jaw. What do you mean? He asked curiously. Hinata gestured to left arm and left leg, both of which were numb and difficult to move. You only throw strikes with your right hand and right leg. That's why I was able to counter you in identical fashion so many consecutive times. Had you been varying your attack, you may have been able to hit me at some point, she explained. Naruto considered her advice for a moment. Good point. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks, Hinata, he said, earning an almost imperceptible nod of approval from the Hyuga girl. He hobbled over to Kakashi and Shikamaru, patting the shadow user on the back once he reached them. You're up, buddy. Have fun out there, he said with a grin. Shikamaru sighed heavily and gave him a thumbs up. I'm just shaking with anticipation, he said sarcastically. Once he reached Hinata, he assumed his taijutsu stance and looked to Kakashi. Let's get this over with, sensei, he said tiredly. The Jonin nodded and signaled for them to begin. As the match began, Naruto looked to his teacher. How long do you think this one lasts? He asked humorously. Kakashi thought for a moment, observing Hinata's predictable domination as he did so. Shikamaru is a sharper striker than you are, but isn't as tireless, and you definitely take a shot better, so I'll say 2.5 minutes, he said. The pair observed the match to its conclusion, in which Hinata doubled the shadow user over with a kick to the ribs. 3 minutes? You weren't far off, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said as the silver-haired ninja made his way towards Hinata and Shikamaru to halt the match. Once the genin were separated, Kakashi gathered the children together. You all show promise in a variety of ways, but you all need work. That includes you, Hinata. None of you are particularly good at minding your P's and Q's while you're attacking, and you're all somewhat one-note with your strike selection. That can all be fixed in due time, so no worries, he said with a nod. He glanced at the dark sky and then back to his team. It's dark out now, so I suppose that's all we have time for. Meet me at the Hokage building at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said before disappearing into a puff of smoke. Naruto sighed. Does he always have to just disappear at the end of the day? He muttered. His teammates both shared the sentiment, as they were both glaring at the place Kakashi had once stood. The blonde then began to walk back towards Konoha. I'm going home. See you guys tomorrow, he said with a wave. Shikamaru then followed suit, leaving Hinata alone in the field. She fixed her gaze on Naruto as he walked away. I suppose I have the time, she thought to herself. She dusted herself off and took a sip of water from her canteen. She then began to silently follow the blonde. Hinata rubbed her eyes as she trailed Naruto through Konoha. His trek home was apparently a long one, because it had been nearly 15 minutes since he and his undetected companion had left the training grounds, and they had not reached his home yet. The Hyuga girl's reasoning for following him stemmed entirely from curiosity. As she had pointed out during her speech to the blonde on the Hokage building roof, Naruto had no family to speak of, and no other legal guardian, meaning that he almost certainly lived alone. His living situation was likely not particularly good, but the prospect of a child living all by his lonesome still fascinated Hinata. After several more minutes of walking, they reached an apartment building and climbed a flight of stairs. The Hyuga heiress hid herself behind a corner as Naruto arrived at what she assumed to be his home. He turned the door knob and opened the door. Instead of making his way inside, he glanced over his shoulder and sighed. You can come out now, he called. Hinata felt her stomach drop. From the tone of his voice, he had been aware of her presence the entire time. The Hyuga girl slowly rounded the corner and presented herself to the blonde. You detected me. Good work, Uzumaki-san. You've surpassed my expectations, she said. Naruto studied her for a moment. Why are you here? Don't you have a curfew? He asked. Hinata nodded and glanced at her pocket watch. I do have a curfew, but my attendance record for family dinners is perfect. One absence won't incur the wrath of my father, she said. The excitable genin nodded and leaned against the wall. You still haven't told me why you're here. I know you're not some crazed fan of mine, quite the opposite actually, So what do you want? He asked tiredly. Hinata took several seconds to put together a feasible explanation. I was curious as to your living situation. Given that you're an orphan, I would assume that you live alone? She asked. Naruto nodded. Yeah, I do. Why do you care about my living situation anyway? Are you looking for something else to mock? He asked bluntly. Hinata flinched at his hard tone. I don't know. I wanted to understand your home life a bit better, I suppose, she said carefully. The blonde snorted. Oh, sorry for jumping to conclusions. Want to come inside? Have some tea maybe? He asked sarcastically. The Hyuga heiress shifted uncomfortably. No thank you. May I ask why you don't appear to have any neighbors? She asked. Naruto shrugged, tapped on the wall. They all left this floor when I moved in a few years back. I didn't do anything, but they just decided to book it. Kind of like you said earlier, actually. People don't see me as a worthwhile person, so they avoid me, he said matter-of-factly. Hinata opened her mouth to ask another question, but shut it again when Naruto raised a hand. Don't ask me anything else, Hinata. My patience is wearing out. If it satisfies your curiosity, my home life isn't all that interesting, because I don't have one, he said. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Good night, Uzumaki-san, she said, turning to leave as she spoke. Naruto responded by entering his apartment and closing the door. Hinata quickly made her way out of the apartment complex and began jogging home. He is quite unpleasant when he's tired. Naruto rubbed his eyes as he waited at the entrance of the Hokage building. He was earlier than even Hinata. This was an entirely intentional aberration from his usual tendency of showing up on or before a deadline. It was a subtle form of payback. Go ahead. Invade in on my terrible personal life anytime you want, Hinata. I'll find ways to piss you off for it, he thought to himself. He yawned and took a sip of water from a bottle he had bought on his way to the building. It had been vastly overpriced, as was the norm for Naruto when dealing with businesses of all shapes and sizes. After several more minutes of monotonous silence, Hinata arrived, as polished and groomed as she always was. Morning, Hinata. Have a nice night? The blonde asked politely. The Hyuga girl stopped several feet from him, her eyes narrowed and her posture stagnant. She was clearly not a fan of having been beaten to the Hokage building, especially by Naruto. After a moment of silence, she nodded and walked to the bench, sitting down once she reached it. Yes, I did. My father was quite understanding of my predicament, so I received no punishment for my tardiness, she replied. The excitable Genin raised an eyebrow and glanced at his teammate skeptically. What do you mean predicament? You followed me home and refused to leave until I told you all about my shitty living situation. That sounds more like a predicament for me than you, he said. Hinata scowled at his words. Refrain from using such profanity when speaking to me, Uzumaki-san. It makes you even less desirable to talk to than you already are. As for what my predicament was, it was that I knew virtually nothing about who you were. I already knew what I needed to know about Nara-san, but your situation was a mystery to me. I like to be well studied when conversing with people, she explained. Naruto snorted. You still don't know a thing about me, Hinata. Just because you've pieced together that I'm an orphan who lives alone doesn't mean that you know how I think and how I function. All you really did was piss me off, he retorted. The pair lapsed into silence at his words. After several minutes of silence, Hinata spoke. Did you ever have parents? A family? She asked. The blonde sighed and ran his hand through his hair. No. I've been alone from day one. I haven't seen any pictures, read any family scripts, or found any history on them. I wonder sometimes if I even had parents. Who knows? Maybe I'm the world's first artificially created human, he joked. Despite the jovial nature of his words, his voice held an easily detectable undertone of pain. The Hyuga girl felt her stomach wrench at his words. She studied him as he stared off into the early morning sun. I doubt that you're artificial, Uzumaki-san. You're far too uniquely frustrating to have been created by another person. You had a family, you were just unfortunate enough to have lost them before you could form memories of them, she said. Naruto chuckled and turned his gaze to the Hyuga heiress. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, even if it was kind of an insult. Thank you, Hinata, he said with a tired smile. Hinata immediately began to feel defensive. It was not meant to be comforting. I was simply stating the extremely low likelihood that you were made in a lab of some kind, she said quickly. The blonde laughed a bit at her reaction, earning a questioning glare from the Hyuga girl. You aren't great with people, are you? He asked. Hinata opened her mouth to retort, but sighed and shut it again. No, I am not. I spend what little free time I have reading rather than socializing. I especially avoid people like you, Uzumaki-san. People who have little to no regard for the standards put in place by the society they live in, she said. Naruto burst out laughing again, frustrating his teammate further. Man, you're no fun. Living by such a strict set of rules is boring. Loosen up a little. I think you'd be a whole lot happier if you did, he suggested. The Hyuga heiress prickled and glared at the blonde. No, I will not loosen up. Why on earth would I want to forget my manners and sink to your level? I would never even consider it, she snapped. Naruto put up his hands and grinned. I guess I was right. You really do need your beauty sleep. You get cranky when you don't get it, he joked, well aware that he was walking a fine line. Hinata's hand shot forward, seizing the bottom of his jaw and pulling his face until it was only an inch from hers. You seem to garner quite a bit of pleasure from insulting my appearance, Uzumaki-san. You have absolutely no room to talk. You're a mongrel compared to me. In layman's terms, I'm out of your league. You should be honored that I'm even touching your face. In fact, you should savor the sensation, because it's the one and only time you'll ever feel it, she hissed before shoving him backwards by his face. The excitable genin stumbled back several steps, laughing as he did so. He rubbed his jaw upon regaining his balance. Soft hands. You've got a grip like a crocodile, though, he said. Hinata growled, but calmed herself down once more and sighed heavily. Why are you being so aggressively mocking today? She asked. Naruto's jovial demeanor vanished instantly, and was replaced with a hard glare. I feel like I don't have much of a choice. When I'm rude, you snap at me and insult my lifestyle. When I try to be polite, you get defensive and insult me some more. If everything I do is going to piss you off, I might as well try to have some fun with you while I'm at it, he said. The Hyuga girl frowned. What do you gain from speaking to me at all? It seems like things would be easier for the both of us if we swore to silence, she asked. The blonde pointed to his forehead protector and shrugged. Whether you like it or not, we're teammates now. I would rather have something resembling a functional relationship with you than be at your throat. We're going to be fighting, and maybe even dying together. Dying next to somebody I hate isn't a goal of mine. If you'll let me, I'm willing to at least try to be nice to you, he said. Hinata pursed her lips and exhaled through her nose. I suppose that's reasonable. I still don't like you, Uzumaki-san, but I'll try to be more civil if you do the same, she said. Naruto nodded and pulled out granola bar. Well, at least we can agree on some things, he said. He then produced a second granola bar and tossed it at the Hyuga heiress, forcing her to catch it reflexively. She glanced at it skeptically. What's this? She asked. Naruto tore open the wrapper of his bar and took a bite of it, chewing it for several moments before swallowing and speaking. Symbolism, he said simply. Hinata studied the small parcel of food and sighed, unwrapping it and taking a bite. She scowled as she chewed it. Raisin. Of course. It's the thought that counts, I suppose. Kakashi chuckled as he led his team into Hiruzen's office. Naruto's lower jaw was imprinted with what looked like the outline of a hand, and he was clearly not aware of it. He and Hinata had arrived nearly an hour early, meaning that they had spent much of that time together. In all likelihood, the hand that had imprinted on Naruto's face was hers. Either she tried to rip his face off, or she's really warming up to him. I'm guessing it's the first one, the Jonin thought to himself as he watched the pair walk alongside Shikamaru. The team entered the Hokage's office and closed the door, awaiting instruction from the elderly man. I would assume you're here for an assignment? In which case, I have another clean-up assignment for you. It should be fairly simple, Hiruzen, who was smoking his pipe, as per usual, said. Naruto groaned. Can't we get something a little better than that? We've been cleaning out gutters and toilets all week, he complained. To his surprise, Hinata nodded in agreement. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, I feel that our unit has proven itself to be quite capable of completing mundane grunt work. I believe a true test of our functionality is in order, she chimed in. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow and looked to Kakashi. They aren't entirely wrong, Kakashi. Would you like to take them out on a C-ranked mission? He asked. The silver-haired ninja thought for a moment. We still haven't asked Shikamaru his opinion yet, he said, casting a glance towards his lazy student. The shadow user shrugged and gestured to his teammates. I could really care less. They've got me outvoted even if I didn't want to. Go right ahead, he said. The Jonin nodded and looked back to the Hokage. Give us a C-ranked mission. I think they can handle it at this point, he said. Hiruzen nodded and tossed a scroll to Kakashi. He unfurled it and chuckled. A bridge builder, huh? Sounds simple enough. When and where do we meet this man? He asked curiously. The elderly Kage pointed to the clock and grinned. This will also be a test of your ability to effectively pack, because you will be leaving in 1 hour. He will be waiting for you at the front gates of the village. His name is Tazuna, he said. The genin all turned white. How long will we be gone? Naruto asked. Hiruzen thought for a moment before holding up a finger. 1 week at the minimum. Pack for longer, just in case, he replied. The blonde nodded and bolted out of the office. Hinata sighed heavily. No manners, that boy, she grumbled to herself before bowing to the Hokage respectfully and taking a step back. I will be leaving to pack, Hokage-sama. Good day, she said smoothly, turning to exit the office upon finishing her sentence. Shikamaru soon followed suit and left the room, leaving only Kakashi and Hiruzen. Are you beginning to understand my reasoning for putting this team together, Kakashi? The Hokage asked. The silver-haired ninja glanced out of the window of the office and watched his students walk down the streets of the village. Naruto and Shikamaru get along fine, but Hinata detests Naruto with a passion. They routinely get into it over small things, and she said some cruel things to him. I don't like the way their personalities mesh, he said honestly. The old man took a drag from his pipe and smiled. Those scuffles are precisely why I assigned them to be in a cell together. Hinata is supremely talented, but she has something of a superiority complex, and she's a social infant in many regards. Naruto has a way of beating humility into people just by being unshakable. Naruto can also learn a thing or two about punctuality and etiquette from Hinata, he explained. Kakashi nodded and turned to leave. Did you know that Hinata followed Naruto home last night? The old man called out. The Jonin raised an eyebrow and turned back around. No, I didn't. This sounds like quite the story. Would you mind telling it? He asked. Hiruzen chuckled and pulled out his crystal ball from underneath his desk. First and foremost, I tend to keep an eye on Naruto if he's out and about at night, for obvious reasons. Last night, he was trailed from the training ground by Hinata all the way until he reached his apartment. He was aware of her presence nearly the entire time, but chose to wait until reaching his doorstep to acknowledge her presence, he began. The silver-haired ninja nodded and motioned for him to continue. Hinata had followed him in order to gain a clearer idea about his living situation. Naruto became angry when she told him this, perceiving it as an attack on his status as an orphan. Primarily because Hinata had made a scathing remark regarding his position as the village pariah earlier that day. They conversed for several minutes about his lack of a home life, going their separate ways after several minutes, he said. Kakashi nodded once more. That was quite insensitive of her. She seems to only see things objectively, he said. The Hokage chuckled and relit his pipe. Quite so. They had a much less negative conversation outside of the Hokage building this morning, but even then, Hinata took a joke much too seriously and marked up Naruto's face. Their relationship isn't good as of yet, but I'm feeling optimistic as to its direction, he said. The Jonin snorted. Why's that? At this rate, she'll cripple Naruto before the mission even begins, he said. Hiruzen smiled in reminiscing fashion. They remind me strongly of Minato and Kushina, he said. Kakashi laughed out loud at the statement. Oh please, they're nothing like them. Naruto is a little like Sensei was in his youth, but Hinata and Kushina are nothing alike, he said. The Hokage shook his head. It's a stretch, I'll give you that. Hinata is much calmer than Kushina was on a moment-by-moment basis, but she has a comparable temper, and she also has a similar tendency to resort to forms of physical violence when angered. Although, Hinata's methods are much more picturesque, he said. The silver-haired ninja thought for a moment before shrugging and turning to leave once more. I guess I can see it, but don't get your hopes up. I personally think they're more likely to kill each other than start a family, he said. He then exited the office and closed the door behind him. Hiruzen smiled to himself and glanced down at his crystal ball. What he saw was more than a bit concerning. Naruto, who looked quite terrified, and Hayashi Hyuga having a conversation in the middle of the street. Naruto felt a bead of nervous sweat trickle down his forehead as he was assessed by the head of the illustrious Hyuga clan. He was tall, had long brown, and wore a cold glare that was identical to Hinata's. Like father, like daughter, I guess. Maybe it's the eyes, the blonde thought nervously as he squirmed under the man's gaze. After several more moments of tense silence, Hayashi spoke for the first time. Good morning, Uzumaki-san. I trust that your missions have been successful as of late? He asked. Naruto nodded and sighed. Yeah, they've been pretty simple. Just a whole bunch of D-rank missions. All we've really been doing is cleaning out people's gutters and carrying things. I think grunt work is the term Hinata used, he replied. The clan head chuckled. You do realize that you effectively are grunts as of now, correct? He said. The blonde nodded and kicked a rock that was sitting at his feet. You mentioned my daughter's name. She happens to be what I've sought you out to discuss, Hayashi said matter-of-factly. All of the fear that the genin had been suppressing immediately flared up again. Oh. What did you want to talk about? I mean, she has been saying that she wants to move teams. Is that what this is about? He asked. The clan head shook his head. She will not be switching cells. She must learn to adapt despite her dissatisfaction. Not that she didn't complain, because she most certainly did. Angrily. What I've come here to talk to you about specifically, Uzumaki-san, is my daughter's intrusion on your privacy last night. I would like to apologize on her behalf, he said. Naruto did a double take. An apology was quite literally the last thing he had expected. You don't really need to apologize. She just followed me home. Her reasoning is a little confusing and frustrating, But you didn't have to come all the way out here to apologize, he said carefully. Hayashi pointed at the boy's fist, which was clenched tightly. You've become tense just from speaking about the incident. My daughter is more than a bit insensitive at times, and she has a bad habit of being something of an egomaniac. She does mean well, believe it or not, but she doesn't think about who her words damage when she speaks, he said. The blonde looked to the ground. It's not like I haven't called her on a little. I honestly deserve a lot of the backlash I get from her, he said. The clan head sighed. She has no comprehension of sarcasm in many cases. She's socially inept, to be perfectly honest. Which is why I would like to make a request, he said. Naruto frowned, but nodded and motioned for the man to continue. You certainly aren't a glowing example of etiquette. In fact, your manners are quite appalling from what I've seen, but that is exactly why I was not bothered by your placement on a team with Hinata. I would like you to, how do I put this, chip away at her shell, shall we say. Don't shy away from her because she is aloof and proud. Take any opportunity to interact. Do that, and she may loosen up a bit, Hayashi said. The genin thought for a moment before nodding. I can do that, I guess. Is there anything else you want me to do? He asked. The clan head nodded. Keep her safe. Intimidating as she may be, she has limitations, he said. Naruto chuckled and scratched the back of his head. She's a hell of a lot stronger than me, Hayashi-sama. I don't think she needs or wants my protection, he said. Hayashi chuckled. Stronger, HM? This coming from the boy who pummeled a Chunin with a mob of 1,000 shadow clones. I think you'll do just fine, he said. The blonde furrowed his eyebrows. How do you know about all of that? He asked skeptically. The clan head smirked and turned to leave. Nothing happens in this village without my knowing about it. Keep that in mind, Uzumaki-san, he said as he walked away. Naruto watched the man as the distance between them grew larger. What was that supposed to mean? Hinata nodded in approval as Naruto arrived at the gates. He was the last to appear, but he was still on time. Despite his punctuality, he looked quite stressed. Sorry I'm late. I ran into someone, and they stopped me to talk, he explained as he leaned against the side of the gate. The Hyuga girl raised an eyebrow at the explanation. And who was this person? I mean no offense to you, but I highly doubt a random citizen of Konoha would stop to talk to you, she said. The blonde scrambled for an explanation that didn't involve her father. Iruka was out and about. We talked about what I should expect on my first out-of-town mission. Just student-teacher stuff, he explained quickly. Hinata stared at him for several moments, clearly skeptical. Eventually, she nodded and turned her attention back to an old man who was conversing with Kakashi. Who is that? Is that who we're escorting? Naruto asked curiously. Shikamaru, who had been silently sitting on a bench nearby, nodded. Yeah. That's Tazuna. Exactly what you'd expect of an old bridge builder. Cranky and temperamental, he said with a chuckle. The group then set off with Kakashi and Shikamaru in the lead. Naruto and Hinata walked alongside Tazuna on either side of him. They trekked on in silence for roughly an hour before Naruto spoke. So, what's this bridge for? He asked curiously. The bridge builder glanced at him and took a sip from a bottle of alcohol. Trade. The Land of Waves will gain a great amount of financial benefit from having a crossable structure to connect it to the Land of Fire. It's extremely important, he explained. The blonde nodded and kept his eyes on the trail ahead. What kinds of things does your country specialize in? I haven't done much research on the Land of Waves, Hinata asked. Tazuna made a wide motion with his hand. Anything really. We have plenty of resources. Which is why we so desperately need this bridge. We're fairly poor as a whole, so such a trade route would be incredibly useful, he said. The Hyuga girl frowned at this. From the sounds of it, this is a monumentally important bridge. Why would you only request a team of genin for such an important task? She asked suspiciously. The old man tensed at the question, but quickly calmed himself. There won't be anything that you can't handle. Just bandits and such, he assured. Both Naruto and Hinata eyed him skeptically, but chose to let it go. The group traveled for several more miles before Hinata stopped, her Byakugan suddenly active. We have company, she whispered. The blonde looked to Kakashi and Shikamaru, who were both halted as well. There were several moments of silence before Hinata suddenly tripped Naruto to the ground and tackled Tazuna. A blur of metallic movement flew over them as they looked on in shock from the ground. Pay better attention. We can't afford to allow Tazuna-san to be injured, the Hyuga girl snapped at Naruto before assuming her stance. The blonde growled and stood up, taking a defensive posture over the bridge builder. The blur of movement then appeared once more. This time, however, Hinata intercepted it with a swift kick, knocking it out of the air and revealing its identity. It was a man with a chain attached to his left arm, and a mask covering the lower half of his face. Not bad, little girl. You've got sharp eyes. Unfortunately for you, not sharp enough, the ninja said menacingly. It was Naruto's turn to trip Hinata, which he did as quickly as he could. As his teammate fell to the ground, Another blur flew over her head, landing next to the chain-wielding man. Naruto pulled Hinata to her feet and returned to Tazuna. How about you pay better attention? I can't have you dying out here. It'll cost me my head if you do, he said. The Hyuga girl dusted herself off, mentally taking note of the remark, which sounded oddly specific. They both stared at their enemies, who were assessing them silently. The one that Hinata had kicked took a step forward, but stopped, seemingly frozen in place. What the hell is this? The enemy shinobi demanded. Naruto glanced to his left and grinned. Shikamaru's shadow was connected to those of both of the chain-bearing ninja. Look, even you have to admit that you deserve this. You just sat there. Of course I was going to lock you down, the shadow user said tiredly. Kakashi then made his way to the genin. Well, this is interesting. These two are known as the Demon Brothers if I'm not mistaken. They're Chunin. These aren't bandits, Tazuna. I think you have some explaining to do, he said sternly. The bridge builder opened his mouth to protest strongly, but shut it again and sighed. Fine. I knew these two were coming. They were sent after me to end my life. They don't want me to get back to the land of waves with the blueprints for the bridge, he said. The Jonin frowned underneath his mask. Why would two Chunin be sent to kill a bridge builder? Who sent them? He questioned. Tazuna lowered his eyes to the ground. I can't answer that, he said quietly. Kakashi narrowed his eyes and took a threatening step forward. You'd better. Because if you don't, we'll abandon you out here and let you be mauled by these two. Shikamaru can release his jutsu anytime he feels like it, he warned. The old man pursed his lips and exhaled through his nose. A mob boss named Gato sent them. He controls much of the economy in the land of waves. The bridge would loosen his iron grip, and he wants me dead for that reason, he explained. The silver-haired ninja nodded in understanding. Well, thank you for your honesty. Unfortunately, those details automatically upgrade this mission from C rank to A rank. Far too much for my genin to handle. You're on your own now, he said. Tazuna's head snapped up. Please don't leave me out here. My people need this bridge, he begged. Kakashi shrugged and motioned for his genin to follow him in the opposite direction. That isn't a concern of mine at this point, he replied. To the Jonin's surprise, Naruto, Hinata, and Shikamaru refused to follow him. Hurry up, you three. We don't have all day, he called to them. The blonde shook his head and motioned for his sensei to come back. Look, we've already made it this far, so why don't we just finish the job? It's almost dark anyway, so we should at least sleep on this, he said. Kakashi raised an eyebrow and glanced at the other genin, who nodded. This mission is far beyond your capabilities. Are you sure you actually want to do this? Answer carefully, your lives may depend on it. Literally, he asked. Shikamaru yawned and shrugged. It'd be a hell of a lot more troublesome to run all the way back to Konoha than to just keep doing what we were doing. Let's give this a shot, he said. The silver-haired ninja thought for a moment before finally caving to the combined pressure of his genin stares. Fine, we can try this. Don't say I didn't warn you, though, he said. Tazuna sighed in relief and allowed Kakashi to lead he and the children down the route for another hour. After the hour had passed, it was pitch dark, prompting the party to set up camp. Although it was quite unusual, Team 7 had certainly taken a step up from D-ranked missions. A much on them was perhaps recommendable. Hinata rubbed her eyes and sat up in her tent. She glanced out of its flap and sighed frustratedly. It was the middle of the night, and it was pitch black. How irritating. I need to be sleeping. We wake at dawn, she thought to herself frustratedly. She laid flat on her back for several more minutes before giving up and exiting her tent. To her surprise, there was a small fire burning roughly 50 feet from the camp, with a single person sitting beside it. The person's identity wasn't clear from her current position, prompting the Hyuga girl to quietly make her way toward the fire. Once she reached it, who was sitting beside it became clear. Uzumaki-san? What are you doing awake at this hour? She asked. Naruto glanced over his shoulder at her and shrugged. I can't sleep. I tried for a few hours, but I gave up after a little while. It's a little chilly, so I made this fire. If the light woke you up, I'm sorry, he said. Hinata nodded and sat down across from him on the other side of the dim fire. Is there any particular reason you're having trouble sleeping? She asked curiously. The excitable genin sighed and leaned his head back. Just thinking about a lot of things. Mostly things to do with this mission. Something Kakashi-sensei said really stuck with me, he said. Hinata raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? She asked. Naruto pulled out a kunai and studied it for a moment before sticking it into the ground beside himself. That this mission could cost us our lives. The idea that I could die within a few days is strange. Strange because it's not entirely unwelcome, I guess, he admitted. The Hyuga heiress frowned. What do you mean? Why would you not be fearful of your own death? She asked skeptically. The blonde shrugged. I'm not quite as lazy as Shikamaru is, but I'm still decently lazy about certain things. One of those things is responsibilities. Having things expected of me is stressful. It's a completely new feeling. I've never been expected to succeed or anything close to it before. Kicking the bucket now would mean that I wouldn't have to deal with those expectations, he said. The Hyuga girl chuckled to herself. I suppose being the village pariah may have a benefit or two. You've never really had to contend with things such as curfews or family standards. It must be a soothing reality to live in, she said. Naruto shook his head. We come from two different places, Hinata. To me, having a standard to live up to sounds like an awesome motivator, and having a curfew would be a really sweet thing. It would make me feel like somebody cared where I went and when, he said. And to me, having neither of those things sounds like a heavenly relief of stress. I suppose you're right. Perspective affects the attractiveness of certain lifestyles, she said, finishing the blonde's point. What are your thoughts about the idea of dying out here? Naruto asked. Hinata thought for a moment before answering the sensitive question. I would much rather survive. I have a clan to lead. I'm not the head yet, but I will be once I turn 18. I would rather not leave my clan's line splintered. Beyond your dislike of having responsibility forced upon you, what do you think of the prospect of dying on this mission? She said. The blonde laughed a bit, his voice suddenly a bit more melancholy. I would rather die out here than in my own apartment. Or out in the street for that matter. I want my death to mean something, you know? He said. Hinata furrowed her eyebrows. You speak as though such a death is likely, she said, her voicing containing the subtlest hint of concern. The blonde glanced up from the fire and looked her in the eyes. You really haven't pieced it together, have you? The villagers do a whole lot more than just glare at me, Hinata, he said bluntly. The Hyuga heiress felt her stomach churn at what he was suggesting. There have been attempts on your life, Uzumaki-san? When? She asked. Naruto nodded and pulled his kunai out of the ground. Yup. They take a swing at it once every few months. Usually in October. They haven't succeeded yet, obviously, but who knows? Maybe they'll catch me off guard one of these times, he said. Hinata stared at the genin wide-eyed. How can you speak of such things so easily? Does your own life really mean that little to you? She asked quietly. The blonde gave her a pained smile. When you've been told that you're a wretch your whole life, that you aren't worth anybody's time, you start to believe it after a little while. I've found ways to keep myself motivated, but that motivation slips every once in a while. And when it does, I end up in a dark place, he said honestly, his hands trembling slightly from both exhaustion and emotion. The Hyuga girl felt a wave of guilt wash over her as she recalled her words to Naruto on the Hokage building roof. She studied her teammate, who was clearly doing his best to stay calm, for several moments before broaching an incredibly risky topic. Have you ever become suicidal, Uzumaki-san? She asked carefully. The genin tensed at the question, but quickly relaxed. Only once, and I promised myself never let myself fall that far again. Suicide is giving up, and I hate giving up more than just about anything, he said firmly. Hinata nodded. To her own surprise, she found that his words brought her a degree of relief. She then stood up from her spot by the fire and began making her way back toward her tent. Thank you for the talk, Uzumaki-san. I am now sufficiently tired enough to sleep, she said gratefully as she opened the flap of her tent. Before she could fully enter, Naruto spoke once more. Night, Hinata, he called quietly. The Hyuga girl remained silent for several moments before smiling to herself and slipping inside her tent. Good night, Uzumaki-san. Naruto yawned as he and the rest of his team trekked on towards an oncoming body of water. They had awoken at the crack of dawn to continue their journey to the land of waves, and they were nearly there. The body of water they were about to cross represented the natural border between nations. There should be a boat up ahead. It'll be a tight fit, but we should be able to make it in one trip, Tazuna said as they reached the beach. As the old man had predicted, there was a transfer boat awaiting them at the bank. The party made their way to the boat and piled in. Tazuna had also been right when he had said that it would be a tight fit, as there was little, if any, space. This sucks, Naruto complained as he and Hinata were crushed into a corner. Shikamaru wasn't faring much better, as he was more or less stuck underneath Kakashi. As they crossed the water, the boat rocked and swayed, causing each ninja to readjust the distribution of their weight in order to prevent the boat from tipping. During one particularly extreme shift, Hinata's face was slammed into Naruto's, causing her forehead to hit his cheekbone. Ow, Naruto groaned as the Hyuga girl fought against gravity to prevent herself from falling on the blonde completely. After several tense moments, the boat resteadied itself, allowing Hinata to scoot several inches away from Naruto. I didn't mean to headbutt you. I'm sorry, she apologized. The blonde raised an eyebrow and shook his head. It's fine. I just wish you didn't have such a hard head, he replied. The Hyuga heiress glared at him, but calmed herself. If only you weren't so physically fragile, then the density of my skull wouldn't be an issue, she countered, her tone uncharacteristically teasing. Naruto grinned and poked her on the forehead, causing her to flinch. From the looks of it, you got bruised worse than me. If anybody's fragile, it's you, Hinata, he said. The Hyuga heiress responded by poking him in the ribs, infusing a bit of chakra into them. The excitable genin yelped as his body was jolted with foreign energy. He rubbed his ribcage and glanced up at Hinata, who was covering her mouth and giggling. Forgive me for laughing, but that was quite funny, she said through her laughs. Naruto chuckled and settled back into place as the boat approached the land of waves. I didn't know you were even capable of laughing, so I guess I don't mind, he replied. The Hyuga girl frowned and looked out over the water before looking back to Naruto. Of course I can laugh. I simply have standards when it comes to humor, unlike you, she retorted haughtily. The blonde sighed heavily. Right back to being a bitch. Go figure, he thought to himself as the boat entered a swath of thick mist. Kakashi, who had been watching Naruto and Hinata bicker with great amusement, frowned at the arrival of the fog. This mist isn't natural. Be on guard, he warned his team. The genin all nodded and alerted themselves. The boat soon reached land, prompting Team 7 and Tazuna to tentatively exit. Once they were fully grounded, they began to walk straight ahead. For several moments, there was peace. That peace was shattered when an enormous butcher's knife came flying through the air, barely missing decapitating Shikamaru. We have company. Surround Tazuna and don't move, Kakashi ordered. The genin did as they were told and formed a defensive triangle around the bridge builder. Hinata activated her Byakugan and surveyed the area around them. She gasped and looked to Kakashi. 2 o'clock, Kakashi-sensei, she yelled. The Jonin immediately jumped straight up, barely avoiding bisection by the same large knife that had flown past them moments beforehand. Kakashi then threw a kunai in a seemingly random direction. The small projectile was then audibly deflected, giving the silver-haired ninja all the information he needed to determine his adversary's location. Kakashi weaved several hand seals and reared his head back. The genin suddenly felt the air temperature shift as their sensei prepared a jutsu. Fire style, fireball jutsu, the Jonin yelled. A blast of orange flames erupted from his mouth and traveled east, clearing away much of the mist and igniting the ground. The figure that was revealed was horrifying. It was a man, and he was nothing short of appalling. He was tall, had serrated teeth, and wielded the enormous knife that had been terrorizing Team 7. Well, this is unexpected. Of all the people I expected to encounter on this mission, you weren't one of them, Zabuza Momochi, Kakashi said. The man grinned underneath the bandages that covered the lower half of his face. So you know my name. I see that my reputation precedes me. I'm flattered, he said in a raspy, malicious voice. He then charged forward and swung his blade at the Jonin, who produced a pair of kunai and blocked the strike. Sparks flew in all directions as the ninja clashed. Zabuza glanced at Naruto, Hinata, and Shikamaru as he strained against Kakashi. I see you brought children for me. How thoughtful of you, Kakashi the copy ninja, he said sadistically. He then kicked the silver-haired ninja in the chest and charged the genin. He swung his blade in a downward arc at them. All three combined their kunai and physical strength in order to block the strike. Despite the combined effort, the impact forced both Hinata and Shikamaru to their knees, leaving Naruto momentarily alone to defend himself. Seems like you've got the most horsepower of your group. Take that to the bank, kid. Because it's all you've got to be happy about right now, Zabuza said with a smirk. He then kicked the blonde underneath his chin, sending him flying backwards. Naruto crashed to the ground 20 feet away with a trail of blood dripping from his mouth due to a split lip. The mist ninja leapt into the air and raised his blade, preparing to cut the boy in half. Before he could bring his sword down on Naruto, Kakashi appeared between them and caught it between his palms. Your fight is with me, Zabuza. Keep them out of this, he warned. He pried the blade from the man's hands and tossed it up in the air. He then slammed a punch into the right side of Zabuza's jaw, causing him to take 3 steps back. The Jonin reached up and caught the man's sword, which he had tossed into the air. He pointed its tip at Zabuza and slowly reached to remove his forehead protector from his left eye. Zabuza scowled and made a hand seal. 2 copies of himself then appeared on either side of him. He grinned and looked back to Naruto, who had returned to Tazuna and his teammates. I think it's only fair that the brats get a workout too. Don't you agree, Kakashi? He asked rhetorically. He then sent his clones after the genin and charged Kakashi. Despite the warning they had been given by their sensei, the children were not prepared in the least for the battle that was to come. Hinata gritted her teeth as the water clones approached she and her teammates. They were at a monumental strength disadvantage, even against clones. She looked to Naruto, who was wiping blood from his lip. Uzumaki-san, make clones, as many as you can. We don't have anything resembling the strength to face this man, so we're going to use numbers instead, she said. Shikamaru, having heard about Naruto's beating of Mizuki from his father, raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you want him to do that? It might get a little crowded, he asked. Hinata frowned at this. I'm sure we'll have plenty of space, Nara-san. Now, Uzumaki-san, she began. Before she could finish her sentence, the battlefield was absolutely swamped with Naruto clones. There you go. That's as many as I can crank out, the blonde said proudly. The Hyuga heiress's mouth hung open in shock as she activated her Byakugan to scan the area. T-2000 clones? How? How in God's name is that possible? She said, dumbfounded by Naruto's incredible feat of chakra reserves. Shikamaru patted her on the shoulder and chuckled. Not as dumb as you thought, Hinata? He asked humorously. Hinata shook her head and regained her bearings. Don't speak as though this is unsurprising, Nara-san, she said defensively. They then turned their attention back to Zabuza's clones, who were tearing through Naruto's mob of doppelgangers. You stay here, Shikamaru. Your shadow jutsu will be a good thing to have when it comes to keeping Tazuna safe. Let Hinata and I do the fake thing, Naruto ordered. The Nara nodded and took a defensive stance in front of the bridge builder. The blonde then looked to Hinata and nodded. The pair then charged the water clones, wading through the ocean of Narutos as they moved forward. After several seconds of travel, they reached the enemy clones. You take the one on the left. I'll take the one on the right, the blonde said. The Hyuga girl nodded and peeled off to her left. Naruto launched himself forward at the rightmost clones, throwing a left-handed punch at Zabuza's head. The doppelganger easily dodged the strike and countered with a hard punch to the left side of the blonde's jaw. Naruto stumbled a bit, but quickly regained his footing. He aggressively attacked the mist ninja again, with nearly 50 clones in tow. The water clones drew a kunai and began mowing through the clones two at a time. He eventually reached Naruto, stabbing him in the shoulder with a kunai and snapping his head back with a sharp punch. The blonde stumbled back and bumped into Hinata, who was being similarly dominated. This is rough. Even with this many clones, we can't touch them, he said. The Hyuga girl and glanced at his shoulder, frowning upon spotting his injury. You're hurt, Uzumaki-san, she said. Naruto shrugged and threw a volley of kunai at one of Zabuza's clones, all of which were deflected. It's nothing terrible. What you should be worrying about is how we get out of this situation, he said as their backs were pressed together. Both Zabuza clones were stalking them, closing their escape routes one by one. Hinata felt fear begin to grip her as the mist ninja grinned at her sadistically. Would you be willing to pass on my final words to my father if I die here? She asked her teammate. The blonde, to her surprise, shook his head. No, for two reasons. One, you aren't going to die here, I'll make sure of that. And two, if you die, I'll die. I would rather be killed by this jackass than your dad, he said. The Hyuga girl furrowed her eyebrows, but didn't open her mouth, as Zabuza was quickly closing in as he mowed through Naruto's clones. Just as the genin were about to be butchered by the water clones, they disappeared. Wait, what? Naruto asked no one in particular. He then made a hand seal and dispelled his clones, clearing the battlefield. Hinata focused her Byakugan and searched the area, eventually finding the answer to the question burning in both of their minds. It seems that Sensei has killed Zabuza, she said. The blonde grinned and glanced to Shikamaru and Tazuna, who were uninjured. Let's go join him, he said, motioning for Hinata to follow him. The Hyuga girl nodded and jogged after Naruto as he ran towards his teacher. As they approached, they noticed something strange. A figure wearing a mask was standing over the body of Zabuza, and appeared to be the one who had killed him. Kakashi, who was also standing near the body, glanced over his shoulder and spotted his approaching students. Yo. Looks like you're both in one piece. That's good, he said as they made their way to him. Naruto gestured to the masked ninja. Who's that? He asked skeptically. The mysterious ninja bowed respectfully and removed a needle from Zabuza's neck. I cannot disclose that information. I can tell you this. I'm a hunter ninja, and I have been tracking Zabuza Momochi for several days. Thank you all for keeping him occupied for long enough for me to arrive and finish my job, the ninja said. He then picked up the mist ninja's body and slung it over his shoulder. Good day, he said politely before vanishing in a puff of smoke. Kakashi then looked to his students and smiled. So, what did you think of your first battle? He asked. Naruto shuddered and shook his head rapidly. It was terrible. That guy was way too strong for us, he said. The silver-hair ninja chuckled and glanced at Hinata, who was scowling. What about you, Hinata? How did you feel about your first battle? He asked. The Hyuga girl gave him a concerned stare. Zabuza wasn't dead. His chakra system was still functioning, she said. Kakashi's eyes widened at the statement. Are you absolutely sure? He asked urgently. Hinata nodded and looked off in the direction she assumed that the masked ninja had gone. Yes, I am. We need to find a place to regroup. Our conflict with Zabuza Momochi is far from over, I fear, she said. You can all stay with my family. The group glanced to their left and saw Shikamaru and Tazuna approaching them. Once they reached the site of Zabuza's death, the bridge builder looked to Kakashi for an answer to his offer. What do you say? He asked. The Jonin nodded and motioned for the old man to lead the way. All right. Thank you for your hospitality, he said. Tazuna took the lead and signaled for the group to follow him. Team 7 began to walk after the bridge builder who, thankfully, was walking at a slow pace. The genin had survived their first battle, but they were far from safe. Naruto sighed heavily as a knock came at his door. He sat up in bed and lumbered over to the door, opening it slowly. Hinata? What are you doing here? Do you need a blanket or something? He asked. The Hyuga girl ignored his question and stepped into the room Tazuna had lent to Naruto, closing the door behind her. What did you mean when you said you would rather die to Zabuza than my father? To my knowledge, the two of you have never met, she asked. The blonde tensed at the question, mentally scrambling for a believable lie. In the end, he opted to be honest. He's the guy that stopped me to talk yesterday. That's the real reason I was a little late, he admitted. Hinata nodded. I assumed as much. What did he wish to speak to you about? She pressed. Naruto suddenly felt incredibly nervous. The information he was being forced to reveal was certain to anger his teammate, and their relationship was far from ideal as it was. He told me to protect you. He was worried about you, and he wanted me to make sure you survived the mission. He never actually threatened me, but I get a strong feeling that he'd hang me out to dry if you got hurt, he explained. The Hyuga girl scowled. Well, he certainly seems to be much more protective than he should be. I don't need protection, especially from you, Uzumaki-san. I'm perfectly capable of defending myself. Don't let his words go to your head. You wouldn't meet the requirements to be my bodyguard in the first place, she said bluntly. The blonde rubbed his eyes and nodded. I know. I suck, and you're better than me. Got anything else to say? If not, leave me alone and let me sleep, he replied. Hinata glared at him for a moment before shaking her head and turning to leave. Sleep well, Uzumaki-san. You'll need to be fresh tomorrow, she said as she opened the door to exit. Before she could, Naruto called out to her. Every once in a while, you should think about how good you've really got it. You may not appreciate your dad being protective, but at least he cares. You may not like me or Shikamaru, but at least we care. I do, at least. I'm not even sure why. I don't have any of those things, and I get the feeling Kakashi-sensei doesn't either. I don't have parents to worry about me, and you sure as hell don't give a damn about me. Be grateful for the people who care about you, Hinata. You never know when one of them will disappear, he said. The Hyuga girl stared at him over her shoulder for several moments before turning her back to him again. She exited the room quickly, seemingly out of irritation with his speech. Little did Naruto know, the emotion overwhelming the girl was not anger. It was guilt. Naruto wiped a bit of sweat from his brow as he stared up at the tree he had been climbing for the last 2 hours. Kakashi had sent Team 7 out into the nearby forest for a special form of training. As it turned out, it was possible to walk on vertical surfaces with the aid of one's chakra. By focusing said chakra into their feet, the genin could walk on nearly any surface, water included. Hinata was already capable of the technique, as she had been taught at a young age by her family. Shikamaru had not been taught, but he had grasped the technique incredibly quickly. Naruto, on the other hand, had not been so fortunate. His massive reserves of chakra made it immensely difficult to focus the correct amount of chakra into his feet. In most cases, he siphoned too much, which resulted in his launching from the tree. Here goes nothing, the blonde thought to himself as he took 2 unsteady steps up the side of the tree. To his surprise, this climbing of the tree went quite smoothly, with the genin reaching the second highest branch. He carefully latched onto the protrusion and made his way onto it. He looked down to the ground and chuckled nervously. He was nearly 70 feet from the forest floor, and a fall would be quite painful. From the look plastered on your face, heights aren't a favorite of yours. Naruto glanced to his left, where another tree was situated. Sitting on a branch at roughly the same height as the blonde was a fairly ambiguous-looking person. The person had long brown hair, somewhat feminine features, and the voice could have belonged to either gender. Before he could open his mouth, the stranger chuckled and spoke. Before you trip over yourself any more than you already have, I'm a boy. You aren't the first to struggle with that distinction, he said with a humorous smile. Naruto nodded and leaned back against the tree. He's a guy, and he's even prettier than Hinata. Not something I thought would ever cross my mind, he thought to himself. The genin then furrowed his eyebrows and studied the boy. How are you up here exactly? Are you a ninja too? He asked skeptically. The feminine boy shook his head and tapped on the tree. Nope. I'm just extremely good at climbing these. It's a hobby of mine. My name is Haku. By the way, he said. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the explanation, but chose not to press any further. Mine's Naruto. Nice to meet you, he replied. The boys made small talk for several minutes before they were interrupted by Hinata, who had been searching for the blonde. There you are. Despite your general loudness, you're shockingly difficult to track down, the Hyuga girl said after landing on Naruto's branch. What do you need, Hinata? Is Zabuza back? Did Shikamaru finally overachieve? the blonde asked jokingly. At the name of the Mist Ninja, Haku momentarily tensed, but suppressed the reaction so quickly that neither genin was able to catch a glimpse of it. Hinata shook her head at the questions. No, none of those things have happened. If they had, you would have noticed. Even your senses aren't that dull, she said. The Hyuga girl then looked to Haku and frowned. Who is this Uzumaki-san? She asked curiously. Naruto grumbled at her first mark, but shrugged at the second. His name is Haku. I met him all of 10 minutes ago, he explained. Hinata did a double take at the masculine pronoun the blonde had used in reference to Haku, a look of obvious confusion on her face. After regaining her momentarily lost composure, the Hyuga heiress began to walk down the side of the tree. Be back home in 15 minutes, Uzumaki-san. Dinner will be served, then she ordered as she descended the stump. After she was assuredly out of earshot, Haku sighed and gave Naruto a sympathetic look. She verbally abuses you, doesn't she? He asked. The blonde shook his head and chuckled to himself. Not really. She just hates my guts. Most of what she says is about how much better than me she is. It's never really all that personal, save for a time or two, he replied. The feminine boy stared off in the direction Hinata had walked. Despite the harshness of her tone, I still get the feeling that she harbors much more complex emotions regarding you. That rocky exterior is nothing but a front, he said. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows. No, I'm pretty sure her feelings regarding me are pretty simple. She hates things that she thinks are below her, and in one sense, I am below her. I did see her laugh once, though, so maybe she has a person buried underneath all of that snark, he said. Haku turned back to the blonde. The reason I say that she likely doesn't actually hate you is that she came to find you for dinner. If she truly detested you, she would have left you here to go hungry. She also seemed to be somewhat relieved by the fact that I wasn't here to threaten or harm you, he explained. Naruto considered his explanation for a moment before nodding. I guess that makes sense. I don't know why you being non-threatening to me would be a relief to her, but I've never been great at reading into that kind of thing, he said. Haku chuckled to himself. Clearly, he thought to himself. The boys talked for another 15 minutes before Naruto stood up to leave. Hinata will probably skewer me with a fork if I'm not at dinner, so I should get going, he said. Haku nodded and waved goodbye as the blonde maneuvered his way down the side of his tree. The boy sighed to himself sadly. Every friend I make becomes nothing more than a name in the obituaries. Hinata grunted with effort as she carried a box of building supplies across the half-finished bridge. Tazuna had brought Team 7 out to the unfinished structure in order to help with its construction. Their role was to move boxes and beams across and around the bridge, which was both tiring and incredibly mundane. How are you holding up, Hinata? The Hyuga heiress glanced to her right and spotted Kakashi carrying a metal beam. He appeared to have not even broken a sweat despite the rigorous exercise. Hinata shrugged as best she could while she set down her box in its designated destination. This is somewhat tiring, but not unbearable. Quite boring, if you ask me, she replied. The Jonin nodded and returned to his work. The Hyuga girl looked to the northern side of the bridge, where Naruto and Shikamaru were slaving away. Even Uzumaki-san is beginning to fatigue. This is just horrible. I would rather be forced to climb every tree in the forest than do grunt work, she thought to herself glumly. The genin continued to grind away for another 30 minutes. Nothing of note happened. No accidents, no drama, no great successes. Once those 30 minutes had passed, however, something interesting did happen. A heavy mist rolled over the bridge without warning, prompting Hinata to activate her Byakugan. The same tactic again. How peculiar, she thought as she looked to her team, who all nodded and began evacuating the various workers. After the builders had been cleared, save for Tazuna, who had demanded to stay behind, the genin all scampered to Kakashi to await directions. We're going to use more or less the same arrangement. I want the three of you to guard Tazuna. I'll handle Zabuza, the Jonin ordered. The children nodded and formed their defensive triangle around the bridge builder. Then they waited. For close to 5 minutes, there was silence. Eventually, a dark chuckle could be heard from within the mist. As it drew closer, the footsteps of not one, but two people could be heard. It sounds like he brought help. This could be trouble, the silver-haired ninja muttered under his breath. The two figures came into view moments later. One of them was clearly Zabuza, but the second figure was more than a bit shocking. That's the same hunter ninja from before. Just as I thought, Hinata said. The mist ninja and the hunter stopped, advancing roughly 20 feet from Team 7. Greetings, Kakashi. It's been a few days. I see you brought your brats again, Zabuza said with a dark grin. The Jonin drew a kunai, took a step forward. And this time, you won't be making any clones to bother them with. I'll make sure of that, he said threateningly. The mist ninja looked to the hunter and gestured to the genin. You deal with the children. They shouldn't require much effort to kill, he ordered. The hunter nodded and waved a hand in front of his face. Suddenly, he was wielding 3 needles made of ice. Yes, Zabuza-sama, he said. He then charged at Naruto, Hinata, and Shikamaru. The blonde looked to Shikamaru. "Stay with Tazuna," he said. The shadow user nodded and drew a kunai to deflect an ice needle that had been launched at him. Naruto and Hinata then sprinted towards the hunter, meeting him in the middle of the bridge. The blonde threw a right-handed punch towards his opponent's head, a strike that the hunter easily leaned away from and countered with a stepping knee to Naruto's chest. "He's fast as hell," the excitable genin thought as he stepped back to catch the wind that had been knocked out of him. He was then passed by Hinata, who engaged the hunter aggressively. She launched a combination of palm strikes to the ninja's body and head, landing 2 of them. As the exchange deepened, however, the Hyuga girl was slowly overwhelmed by the speed of her foe. She was eventually knocked backwards by a hard punch to the center of her forehead. She was caught and steadied by Naruto before she could fall to her rear end. The pair both studied the enemy before them. After several seconds, Hinata looked to the blonde. "We need to create a diversion. We don't have even half of the speed necessary to contend with him. Do you have any smoke bombs on you?" she asked. Naruto nodded and reached into his tool pack. "I'm guessing you want me to throw it at him so you can attack him while he's blind?" he asked. Hinata nodded and motioned for the blonde to enact the plan. The excitable genin rushed the hunter and hurled 2 smoke bombs at him, both of which burst at his feet. Hinata then rushed into the cloud of smoke. Due to his lack of a dojutsu, Naruto was forced to wait at the edge of the cloud as his teammate battled the hunter. After several moments of tense, unviewable combat, the Hyuga heiress came flying out of the smoke. She crashed into Naruto, knocking him to the ground. "Could you not get launched during one of these fights? I'm getting sick of being your landing pad," Naruto groaned as Hinata got up from on top of him. She chuckled to herself and assumed her stance. "My father ordered you to protect me, didn't he? While I entirely detest his choice in bodyguard, you do make a good cushion," she replied. The blonde growled and stood up. "Glad I could be of some use to you, Queen Hyuga. We're best friends now, right?" he asked sarcastically. Before they could start bickering, the hunter emerged from the smoke and kicked them backwards several feet. "You argue like a married couple on the verge of an ugly divorce in the middle of battle. You really should be paying better attention," he said. The hunter then gestured to the puddle of water at their feet. "Why do you think Zabuza-sama used the mist again? He knows as well as you do that the same tactic would never work twice." "He used it to assist me," he said. The pair both flinched as the water supercooled and froze. It then rose from the ground and swirled around them for several moments. "Demonic ice mirrors!" the hunter yelled. The water formed into a dozen or so icy mirrors in a dome-like formation around the genin at his command. The hunter then sunk into one of them, much to the confusion of Naruto and Hinata. "Be warned, none have survived this technique. You will die here today, whether you wish to or not," he called from within the ice. Before the children could react, a volley of frozen needles came flying at them from all directions. By the time the storm was finished, both genin were covered in small cuts and puncture wounds. "I couldn't even see them. Even with my Byakugan," the Hyuga girl said, her tone brittle with shock. The blonde clenched his jaw and created several shadow clones. "We need to break those mirrors," he said. He then sent his clones to strike the icy mirrors. Before they could make contact with them, they were shredded to bits by a wave of needles. The hunter's outline then appeared in several of the mirrors at once. "You cannot touch the mirrors. Even if you did, they are nearly indestructible. Give up. Death will be painless if you do," he said. The pair both growled in defiance and continued to make rushes for the mirrors, being repelled each time. After several minutes of failure, the Hyuga girl came to a realization. "He is moving from mirror to mirror at an absolutely blinding speed. We have to intercept him somehow," she said through gritted teeth. Naruto took a deep breath and pulled a needle out of his arm. "How do we do that, though? Even your eyes can't track him," he pointed out. The Hyuga heiress responded by sidestepping a trio of needles. "There's a pattern to the way he moves and where he moves to. It's subtle, but timeable. For every 5th flurry of needles, he moves 1 mirror to the left, or he crosses to the opposite side," she explained in a hushed tone. The blonde nodded and turned his attention back to the hunter. "We're going to survive you, Haku. We'll do more than that, actually. We're going to bring you down," he assured. The hunter visibly tensed. "So you knew?" he asked. Naruto nodded and assumed a taijutsu stance as he prepared to evade a storm of needles. "I recognized your voice. I think Hinata did too. I would ask you why you're trying to kill us, but it's pretty clear that you only interacted with us to gain information," he said, a hint of pain in his voice. Haku went silent for a moment before disappearing from the mirror he had been occupying. He reappeared directly in front of Naruto and punched him across the left side of his jaw, sending him to his rear end before retreating back into a slab of reflective ice. "Keep your personal feelings out of this, Naruto-san. It will make things much more difficult for both you and I if you don't," the hunter warned. The genin then re-engaged Haku, managing to make contact with him as he flew by on several occasions, but never inflicting damage. Finally, During one specific exchange, Hinata was able to kick Haku out of the air, sending him to the ground roughly 10 feet from herself and Naruto. Those eyes of yours are a nuisance. I think I'll aim for them next time, Haku growled as he stood to his feet and entered an ice mirror. The hunter then began to erratically change his position, flying from mirror to mirror in a seemingly random and nonsensical pattern. I won't be able to dodge. I need to protect my eyes, Hinata thought frantically. She threw up her hands to cover her face as Haku prepared to launch a flurry of needles. The hunter noticed that she had left her neck exposed during her efforts to avoid ocular injury, and adjusted his aim. Checkmate, Hinata-san, he whispered from the mirror directly behind the Hyuga girl. Hinata reflexively whipped around to face him, exposing her neck further. Haku then launched an absolute maelstrom of needles in her direction. Hinata squeezed her eyes shut as she awaited the sting of the puncture wounds. The sting never came. Kakashi gritted his teeth as he avoided a swing of Zabuza's blade. He and the Mist Ninja had been fighting for roughly 10 minutes, and it had been anything but easy. They were nearly even. You're a slippery one, Kakashi. Tough to pin down, Zabuza said as he continued to attack the silver hair ninja. Kakashi stepped to the left to avoid a thrust of the man's sword, pivoting off to his left as he did so. The Jonin then slammed a left-handed punch into the right side of Zabuza's jaw, spinning his head around and causing him to stumble back. As the Sharingan ninja moved in to follow up on his successful counter, who was struck by the flat of the Mist Ninja's blade, launching him back nearly 20 feet. Kakashi landed on his feet and regained his footing. He glared at Zabuza and prepared to attack once more, but stopped when he noticed that the Mist Ninja was staring off to his left with a look of amusement on his face. It looks like Haku has 2 of your brats locked up. I'm sorry to say, but they're more or less dead in the water now, he said, turning his gaze back to the Jonin. Kakashi glanced in the direction Zabuza had been looking and clenched his jaw. Naruto and Hinata were confined with what appeared to be a dome of mirrors made of ice. He took a deep breath and charged the Mist Ninja again, this time leading with a kick to the right side of the man's ribcage. The kick landed square to Zabuza's floating ribs, causing him to double over. The Jonin built on his success by grabbing him by the neck and flinging him back several meters. I have to end this soon. They won't last long in that dome of ice. Hang on, you 2-foot. Hinata's eyes slowly opened as she realized that she was, in fact, alive. Even more interesting was the fact that she wasn't in any more pain than she had been previously. She glanced up from the ground, which she had looked to in fear when Haku's needles had been launched. What she saw made her blood run cold. Naruto had thrown himself in front of her in order to shield her from the storm of icy needles, which explained why the Hyuga girl was more or less fine physically. You Uzumaki-san? She said quietly. Naruto glanced over his shoulder at the girl and gave her a strange smile. His body was riddled with needles, nearly 50 in total. What's with the look? You look like you just saw a ghost, he said humorously. His knees then gave out, causing him to fall backward. Hinata snapped out of her daze and caught him just before he could hit the ground. Why? Why would you do something so stupid and reckless? She demanded as she cradled his head. The blonde tried to shrug, but coughed painfully as a result, spilling a bit of blood from his mouth. I've still got a promise to keep. I told your father I'd keep you safe. Besides, it's better that I die here instead of you. You're important, Hinata. I'm not, he said honestly. The Hyuga girl felt her chest tighten. But you're a member of this team, and we need you to function properly. We need you, Uzumaki-san, she reasoned quietly. Naruto shook his head and chuckled. Look on the bright side, you've been saying this whole time that you'd rather be on a different team. It isn't a full switch, but you won't have to put up with me anymore, he said. The Hyuga girl felt her eyes become wet at his words. Guilt was taking hold of her, and she was being overwhelmed. I jumped to conclusions too quickly. I'm satisfied with my team. You and Nara-san have been reliable and brave throughout this mission. I don't want this cell to be splintered, she said tensely. Naruto smiled. Well, I'm glad you're warming up to us. I tried hard to make you see that we were worthy of being your teammates. Honestly, that was my goal from day one, he said. Hinata's eyes finally overflowed, sending tears dripping down her face. I was foolish enough to think you weren't. I was wrong. Completely and utterly, she said tearfully. The blonde reached up and wiped a tear from her face, causing her to clench her jaw to prevent sobbing. I didn't think anybody would cry for me when I died. Thank you for that, Hinata. Thank you so much, the blonde said gratefully. The Hyuga heiress took hold of the hand he had used to wipe away her tears with her free hand and squeezed it as she sobbed. Please save your strength. Stop talking, Uzumaki-san, she pleaded. Naruto sighed heavily as his eyes dulled slightly. I know this may not mean much coming from me, but I've always thought you were really pretty. In a regal sort of way, he said. Hinata broke down further at his words. Stop being so kind to me. I treated you like garbage. I should be the one bleeding on the ground, not you, she cried. The dying genin smiled sadly. You say that like you were the only one. I've dealt with worse. My apartment gets trashed every other week, and I've been mugged more than once. You're so much better than those people. Don't be so hard on yourself, he said reassuringly. The Hyuga girl gathered enough composure to ask one simple question that had been burning in her mind. Why? What did you do to deserve such persecution? She asked shakily. Naruto used the last of his strength to lift up his shirt, revealing the seal Hinata had seen with her Byakugan. Because I'm a monster, he said simply. The light then left his eyes completely, prompting his body to go limp in Hinata's arms. The Hyuga heiress shook him gently in a desperate, feeble attempt to wake him. Uzumaki-san? Stay with me, please. Tell me what you meant by what you just said, she begged quietly. When he didn't respond, she shook him harder. Wake up, Uzumaki-san. Please don't go to sleep. Damn it, answer me when I'm talking to you, she sobbed. Instead of shaking him again, she hugged his body tightly and buried her face in the crook of his neck. Who do you think you are? Just as I was starting to care about you, you die and leave me alone again. Why? Don't my feelings mean anything to you? She demanded through sobs. She then pulled her head from his neck and gazed at his tranquil, lifeless face. Hinata then planted a soft kiss on his forehead and pulled his head into her chest. Naruto, she whimpered, her tear ducts exhausted and her throat raw from the weeping. She gently laid his body down and silently paid her respects before turning to face the mirrors, where Haku had watched the scene from. Come out, Haku-san. Your fight is with me now. Shikamaru felt his blood run cold as Hinata stood up from Naruto's body. He was dead. There was no doubt about it now. He had given up his life to save hers. A valiant, noble effort. One that deserved to be remembered. Wow. I really didn't expect her to cry over him. Not like that, at least Tazuna, who was standing behind the shadow user, said. Shikamaru clenched his jaw and lowered his eyes to the ground as he paid his respects to his slain comrade. She always treated him like garbage. She never beat him up or anything like that, but she said some cutting things to him. I think she always felt guilty after saying them, though. It was pretty clear that she was starting to warm up to him a little during this mission. I can't imagine the guilt. Somebody you've used as a doormat for the entire time you've known them throwing themselves right into their own death for your sake. How is a person supposed to react to that? He said quietly. The bridge builder tapped him on the shoulder, prompting him to look up at the dome of ice. Hinata was back on her feet, and she was fighting. She was dodging many more of the needles than she had been able to previously, and she had connected on the airborne hunter several times. Despite the increased success, the pace at which she was being forced to attack and defend was unsustainable. Go help her. I'll be fine on my own, Tazuna said. The Nara opened his mouth to protest, but shut it again and handed the old man a kunai. He then sprinted off towards the frozen mirrors. Once he reached the edge of the structure, he stopped. There would be no point in entering the fray. He was much slower than Hinata, who was clearly the more sluggish of the combatants within the mirrors. What the hell am I supposed to do? I'm useless against that kind of speed. Hinata's eyes are what's keeping her alive, and I don't have a dojutsu. I'll be torn to ribbons if I go inside, he thought frantically. Just as panic began to settle in, Shikamaru noticed something. Every time Haku flew across the space within the dome, his shadow became visible for a split second. It was barely detectable, but it was definitely there. I can work with that, the shadow user thought to himself. He then made the hand seal for his shadow possession jutsu. His timing would need to be perfect. He would likely only 1 or 2 chances before the hunter caught on to his tactic. Shikamaru focused his vision and waited for Haku to come flying out of his mirrors. Once he did, the lazy genin launched his shadow into the dome of mirrors, missing the hunter's shadow by inches. Shikamaru growled in frustration. I need to send it out a few seconds early, or I'll miss by those same inches again, he thought to himself. As he waited for Haku's shadow to appear once more, Hinata glanced over her shoulder and spotted him. The shadow user put a finger to his lips. The Hyuga girl nodded and returned her attention to the hunter. After another moment, Shikamaru sent out his shadow. Just as he had predicted, Haku came flying out of his mirrors a second later. Their shadows crossed one another, allowing the Nara to take control of his body and immobilize him. The hunter crashed to the ground, paralyzed by the lazy genin's jutsu. Hinata immediately rushed forward and struck Haku with a flurry of palm strikes. The hunter was launched backwards into one of his mirrors. Despite the impact, the frozen slab did not crack or move. Haku growled and forced his way to his feet, resisting and overpowering Shikamaru's shadow possession all the while. I can't hold him, Hinata! Hit him again! The Nara yelled. The Hyuga heiress charged forward to continue her assault, but was forced back by a flurry of needles thrown her way by the hunter. Haku then broke free of Shikamaru's control entirely, sinking back into his mirrors once more. An absolute maelstrom of needles then came flying at Hinata from all directions, seemingly sealing her fate. Before the icy spears could make contact, they all melted away. How? Hinata stuttered as the needles melted into a large puddle of water at her feet. A powerful, burning wind then came rushing into her back, causing her to stumble forward. She glanced over her shoulder and gasped. The superheated wind was coming from Naruto, who was rising to his feet slowly. The Hyuga girl covered her mouth with her left hand as the previously lifeless genin stood up straight. The needles protruding from his body had melted away, leaving a multitude of small holes on his jacket. His eyes were glowing a blood-red color, and his pupils were slits. He slowly made his way past Hinata, stopping once he was between she and Haku. He glanced down at the terrified heiress, who had fallen to her rear end out of shock, and stared at her for several moments before returning his attention to the hunter. "You're going to die here, Haku." Kakashi flinched as a wave of extreme heat came rushing through the battlefield. It had come from the dome of frozen mirrors. He glanced to his left to better identify the cause of the whirlwind. What he saw was disturbing, to say the least. Naruto was back on his feet, and he appeared to be glowing with a red substance that resembled chakra. His seal broke. Not good, the Jonin thought to himself nervously. He then looked to Zabuza, who was also confounded by the shocking turn of events. "Your partner is going to die. He's awakened something he has no way to deal with," he said. The mist ninja scowled and charged forward, slamming his blade into Kakashi's pair of kunai. Sparks flew in all directions as the shinobi strained against one another. "Even if you're right, that brat still can't stand up to me. Once I've killed you, he's next," he replied darkly. The pair separated and leapt backwards, both taking a deep breath. Zabuza then began to weave hand seals, which Kakashi mimicked perfectly. "Water style, water dragon jutsu!" they yelled simultaneously. The water that had previously been mist pooled around the shinobi and formed itself into a pair of dragons. The elemental beasts then slammed into one another, sending a shower of freezing cold water in all directions. Kakashi used the spray of moisture as an entrance into close range, rushing across the bridge and slamming a punch into the left side of Zabuza's jaw, sending him staggering backwards. Capitalizing on the moment of weakness from his opponent, the silver-haired ninja weaved another series of hand seals and reared his head back. "Fire style, fireball jutsu!" he yelled, launching a large sphere of searing flames into the mist ninja. The blast burst into a swath of flames on contact, the fire causing much of the moisture on the bridge to evaporate, creating a cloud of steam. Once the obstructions cleared away, Zabuza became visible once more. He had blocked the jutsu with his arms, which were now badly burned. "Fire style? Not the smartest move against a water stylist. That hurt like hell, I'll give you that, but you're going to need a whole lot more than that to kill me," Zabuza said. Kakashi gritted his teeth and glanced back over to the ice dome. "You'd better not lose it, Naruto. I don't think I'll have enough left in the tank to fight you after this fight is over." Hinata struggled to control her heart rate as Naruto stared down Haku. The tension in the air was palpable, but even more jarring than the sheer pressure being exerted by the blonde was the strangeness of the situation itself. Naruto had clearly died, or at least fallen into a fatal coma, and yet he stood on his feet, ready to fight. Is this what he meant when he called himself a monster? Hinata wondered to herself as Naruto shifted his feet. After another moment of unbearable silence, the resurrected genin vanished from sight. He reappeared 10 feet in the air, with a fist planted on the left side of Haku's jaw. The strike sent the hunter crashing into a mirror of ice, which shattered on impact. Haku went tumbling across the bridge, only managing to stop himself at the edge of the bridge. What incredible speed and power! He timed Haku-san's speed and shattered one of the mirrors with nothing more than the impact of a punch, the Hyuga heiress thought to herself with her mouth agape. Naruto then roared viciously and sprinted after the hunter. The Hyuga heiress struggled to her feet and attempted to steady her shaking hands to no avail. What on earth is going on? 5 minutes ago, he couldn't even touch him, and now he's battering him pillar to post. Just what are you, Uzumaki-san? She wondered to herself. She slowly walked closer to the one-sided fight that was being waged across the bridge, her steps becoming more and more unsteady as she approached. After a moment or two of shaky walking, she stopped and took several deep breaths. She had halted roughly 20 feet from the site of the battle. She now had a clear view of the fight and all that was happening within it. It was clear that Haku had nothing for Naruto. A simple glance at the look on his face, which was now exposed due to his mask having been knocked off, could have told even the most foolish man as much. Hinata flinched as the blonde floored the hunter with a brutal, right-handed punch to the left side of his jaw, knocking one of his teeth loose. He isn't getting up from that. This fight is over, Hinata thought to herself as Naruto stood over his fallen foe. The enraged seized Haku by the front of his shirt and lifted him from the ground. He bared his teeth and reared back his free left hand. It was at that moment that Hinata realized that Naruto had a set of serrated fangs and claws. The Hyuga girl turned her gaze away from the scene, preferring not to witness what appeared to be an inevitable decapitation. To her surprise, no tearing sound came. Hinata turned her head back towards Naruto, who had set Haku back down on the ground. The hunter appeared to be just as shocked as the Hyuga girl. The blonde then punched Haku in the stomach, crumpling him to his knees. Don't get the wrong idea, Haku. I haven't forgiven you for what you did to me, or Hinata for that matter, but I'm going to let you live. Try anything funny though, and I'll rip out your throat with my teeth, Naruto said threateningly. The hunter lowered his eyes to the ground and nodded. The blonde then glanced over his shoulder and spotted Hinata, who was staring at him wide-eyed. Do you get it now? He asked. Despite the vagueness of his question, the meaning of it was clear. The Hyuga heiress opened her mouth, but no words came. After several more failed attempts to speak, Hinata finally forced words out of her mouth. No, I don't. I don't understand what I'm looking at. What is this? What kind of awful transformation is this? Where did Naruto Uzumaki go? The boy I knew was not this violent. The boy who died for my sake is gone. Who are you? She demanded. Naruto looked at his clawed hands and sighed, causing the red chakra to fade away. His nails returned to a normal length, and his fangs retracted. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Whether you like it or not, what you just saw was me. Probably the worst version of me, but still me, he replied. The Hyuga girl stared at him, a whirlwind of emotions ravaging her as she attempted to process. Is this why you were shunned by the villagers? Is this why you never had a family? She asked quietly. The blonde gave her a pained smile. Yup. Most of them haven't seen what you just saw. In fact, you're only the second person to have seen that side of me, but they're still appalled by me, he said. Before Hinata could respond, the sound of crackling electricity ripped through the area. Naruto, Hinata, and Haku all looked to their left. Zabuza was being held in place by a pack on Niken, and Kakashi was charging what appeared to be a lightning-style jutsu. What an unbelievable chakra, Hinata said in a shocked tone. The distant Jonin then lowered his stance and prepared to make a charge towards the mist ninja. Haku, who had been seemingly battered to the point of being crippled, then disappeared from sight. He reappeared between Zabuza and Kakashi. His intervention had prevented the mist ninja from being impaled by the electrical jutsu, but it had also resulted in Haku himself being stabbed. Why the hell would he do that? Kakashi-sensei is just going to kill Zabuza anyways, Naruto wondered out loud. Rather than answering verbally, Hinata motioned for the blonde to follow her to the site of their teacher's battle with Zabuza. Naruto nodded and jogged after his teammate towards the Jonin. As they ran, the Hyuga girl glanced over her shoulder at him. Once this is finished, you and I are going to have a talk. You have some explaining to do. Kakashi's eyes widened as he pulled his arm from Haku's abdomen. The boy had thrown himself in front of his master in a final effort to save his life, and it would likely cost him his own. As the Jonin's electrically charged arm was removed from his chest, the hunter fell to his knees and coughed up a sizable amount of blood. What the hell are you doing here, Haku? Didn't I tell you to deal with those brats? Zabuza demanded, his voice more emotional than it ever had been previously. The critically injured hunter looked to his master and gave him a pained smile. I was beaten, Zabuza-sama. Naruto-san unleashed an awful power. Something I had no way of defeating. I'm sorry for failing you, he said through a fit of painful coughs. The mist ninja stared down at his dying subordinate and sighed. I suppose we both lost today, Haku, he admitted. Haku opened his mouth to speak, but hacked up blood instead. After several more moments of painful convulsions, the boy stopped moving. Kakashi knelt down and searched for a pulse, but found none. He's gone. I'm honestly amazed that he managed to stay alive long enough to speak at all, he said. Zabuza struggled against the Jonin's Niken for a moment before looking to the silver-haired ninja. Would you mind letting me go? I need to pay my respects, he said. Kakashi remained silent for a moment before calling off his dogs and unsummoning them. The mist ninja knelt down in front of Haku and closed his still open eyes. He then whispered a word or two before standing up and turning to Kakashi. If you'd like to kill me, go right ahead. I'm exhausted, and you have numbers on your side. I'm a dead man walking, he said. As the Jonin was about to respond, the roar of a mob sounded off in the distance. The entire group of ninja all glanced to their right and spotted an oncoming horde of hooligans. They were being led by a short man with a cane who was wearing sunglasses. Zabuza growled to himself. That's your cue to leave. Gato, the man that hired me, is here, and he brought friends. I'll deal with these pathetic wretches, he said to Kakashi. The silver-haired ninja raised an eyebrow. Why should I trust you? He asked. The mist ninja chuckled and picked up his enormous sword. You shouldn't, but if you need a reason, it's because I have a personal vendetta against that man. He's always been stingy about paying his employees, myself included. I'm going to take that money in blood, he said with a dark grin. Kakashi hesitated for a moment before looking to Naruto, Hinata, and Shikamaru, who had silently watched the entire scene unfold from a safe distance. "Get going, you three. I'll catch up with you," he ordered. The children nodded and took off in the opposite direction. Zabuza gave the Jonin a strange look as they prepared to fight off the horde. "Why are you staying here? Why are you helping me?" he asked skeptically. Kakashi drew another pair of kunai and assumed a stance. "I've never much cared for cheapskates myself," he replied simply. The Mist Ninja laughed out loud and pointed his blade towards the oncoming mob. "Great minds think alike, I suppose?" Naruto chewed his lip absently as he leaned against a tree. It had been an exceptionally long day, and not a particularly good one. Hinata's reaction to finally having seen his demonic power had been far from ideal, and he had nearly lost his mind during his fit of rage. On top of that, he had also more or less died. Quite a day indeed. As he reviewed the day in his mind, a twig snapped several feet from him. He glanced up and saw Hinata staring down at him. "Did you really think running out into the forest would stop me from finding you, Uzumaki-san?" she asked, sounding somewhat irritated. The blonde sighed and shrugged his shoulders. "Can you really blame me for wanting to be alone right now?" he replied as he stood to his feet. The Hyuga girl stepped closer to him and frowned. "I don't mean to be rude, but I would rather skip all of this emotional drabble. I have questions, and you have answers," she said bluntly. Naruto chuckled. "And you chew me out for my manners. Go right ahead. Ask me questions. Just a warning, I don't think you'll like the answers you'll get," he said. Hinata nodded and took a deep breath. "First of all, what on earth was that ungodly power you unleashed against Haku-san?" she asked. The blonde lifted up his shirt and pointed to the seal on his stomach. "Are you aware of what a Jinchuriki is, Hinata?" he asked. The Hyuga heiress' eyes widened, but she nodded. "I am, yes. A person who harbors one or several ethereal beings. Usually demons," she said. Naruto pointed to himself and gave her a forced smile. "That's what I am. I'm the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox," he said. Hinata stared at him for several moments before speaking once more. "So, that's why the villagers repeatedly called you things such as demon brat or devil fox. As shocking as it is, that information does tie several things together. Let me guess, your birthday is October 10th? She asked. The excitable Genin nodded. Yup. The same day the fox attacked Konoha 13 years ago. I don't know why the fox was sealed in me, but I know that it had to have happened on the day I was born, he said. The Hyuga heiress studied him for a moment. Alright, I have one other question. Are you capable of accessing the fox's power at will? She asked. Naruto shook his head. No. Only when I'm in a state of extreme anger. It's only happened one other time, but that's a whole different story, he replied. Hinata sighed. I'll be honest with you, Uzumaki-san. I really don't know how to feel about what I saw today. What you did to Haku-san was quite difficult to watch, even if he was my enemy. You became somebody other than yourself. For a brief few minutes, you were no longer Naruto Uzumaki, and that was quite unsettling to see, she said. The blonde snorted. That's a new tune from you. I thought I wasn't worth your time, he said. The Hyuga girl, to his surprise, smiled at this. My opinion of you has changed for the better, from your perspective, at least. I've actually come to enjoy speaking with you, if only slightly. And, as much as it pains me to admit it, you can be quite funny on occasion, she said. Naruto stared at her wide-eyed. Oh, thank you? He stuttered, not knowing how to react to the sudden surge of positive reinforcement from his usually icy teammate. The Hyuga heiress chuckled at his reaction. My. I didn't know it was possible to put you at a loss for words. Perhaps I should be nicer to you from now on. It would certainly save me some headaches, she said humorously. After several moments of silence, Hinata turned to leave. She walked a few steps before turning around again and making her way to Naruto. To the blonde's shock, she pulled him into a tight embrace, positioning her mouth by his ear. Thank you for saving my life. You showed me the ultimate form of mercy when I didn't deserve it. I'll repay you for that someday, I promise, she whispered. Naruto opened his mouth to respond, but was hushed by the Hyuga girl. I know what you're about to ask me, Uzumaki-san, and you don't need to worry. I don't consider you to be subhuman simply due to your status as a Jinchuriki. The boy who spoke to me as he lay dying in my arms was human. So heartbreakingly human. You're worth more than you think. All you need to do is believe it yourself, she said. She then separated herself from him and smiled. Oh, and thank you for calling me pretty, she said, obviously pleased by the compliment. She then turned around and began to walk back towards Tazuna's house. Before she could fully leave the blonde's line of sight, he called out to her. You could call me by my first name, if you want, he said. Hinata glanced over her shoulder and smiled almost imperceptibly. Good night, Naruto-san. Naruto yawned as he sat up in bed. It was morning, and he had not been required to wake up early for the first time in quite a while. He and the rest of Team 7 had arrived home from their mission in the Land of Waves the previous night. They had received their compensation, which had been increased substantially due to the A-ranked nature of the originally C-ranked assignment. After the pay had been administered, all 4 members had rushed home. They had all been completely and utterly exhausted by the experience, and they had desperately needed rest. At least Kakashi-sensei gave us the day off. I think it was more for himself than us, honestly, the blonde thought to himself, as he climbed out of bed and headed into his modest kitchen. He mindlessly placed a cup of instant ramen into his microwave and sat down at his dining table to wait. As he sat in impatient silence, his mind wandered back to the Land of Waves. The mission had been a success overall, with Tazuna being safely returned to his home country without injury, building blueprints in hand. Zabuza Momochi had apparently survived the ordeal as well according to Kakashi. Apparently, the Mist Ninja had bolted once he and the Jonin had mowed through Gato's men. Not overly shocking, but still somewhat surprising to the Jinchuriki. The blonde's thoughts then traveled back to his and Hinata's battle against Haku, in which he had been put into a near-fatal coma for several minutes. The sensation of being so close to the doors of death was strangely unsettling to Naruto despite his relative misery. Well, I guess that puts a nail in that coffin, the genin thought to himself, an image of a noose finally being pushed from his mind entirely. The other major occurrence within the battle with the hunter was Hinata and Shikamaru's first sighting of the Jinchuriki's demonic chakra. Their reactions had been quite unconventional. Shikamaru blew it off and told me his mother was scarier, and Hinata got all touchy-feely for some reason. Not that I mind either reaction. They both made me feel nice, Naruto thought to himself with a smile. As he became more and more lost in his thoughts, he was rudely interrupted by the ringing of his microwave, which had completed its task of heating his ramen. He extracted his breakfast from the heating machine and blew on it several times. He then glanced up at the clock for the first time since awakening. Only 6:45? I guess I've got an internal clock. I figured it would take more than a week to develop, Naruto thought to himself as he ate his noodles. After several minutes of alternating between eating his food and sipping cold water, a knock came at the Jinchuriki's door. Naruto sighed and stood up from his seat. He made his way to the entrance of his dwelling and opened the door. Good morning, Naruto-san. Hinata, who was standing at his doorstep. She, unlike Naruto, was already showered and dressed. She looked as well-groomed as always. Polished and pristine at 7 in the morning. Figures, the blonde thought to himself as the Hyuga girl stared at him, patiently waiting for a response from the Jinchuriki. Morning, Hinata. Not to be rude, but why are you here? It's kind of early, the unshowered genin asked skeptically. Hinata pointed to the family crest on the side of her shirt. My father has requested your presence. I'm here to retrieve you, she explained. Naruto nodded and sighed. He had been expecting such a summoning. Let me guess, this is about our mission? He asked. The Hyuga heiress nodded and brushed a lock of hair behind one of her ears. Most likely. I was questioned as to the details of our mission and what happened. I gave as favorable an account of your sacrifice and subsequent mauling of Haku-san as I could, she said. The Jinchuriki rubbed his eyes and stretched. Thank you, I guess. Your dad seemed like a decent guy to me, honestly. Then again, maybe he was just being nice to get me to agree to being your bodyguard, he said tiredly. The Hyuga girl shook her head. I doubt that. My father is a very straightforward and cordial man. He doesn't suck up to people, as they say. Although, I am slightly surprised that he extended that cordiality to you. Most of the clan heads view you as a nuisance, she said. The moment the final sentence left her mouth, a look of guilt flashed across her face. Forgive me for my rudeness, she said quietly, bowing politely. Naruto burst out laughing at the gesture, earning a confused glare from his teammate. What is so funny, Naruto-san? She asked. The blonde slowly calmed himself down and allowed his laughter to subside. Once he did, he gave the girl a grin. You bowing to me is literally the last thing I thought I would see this morning. You don't need to apologize to me, Hinata. You're not wrong. I kind of dug my own ditch with the other clan heads, so it's my fault they don't like me much, he said. The Hyuga heiress raised an eyebrow. What did you do? Nothing overtly damaging, I hope, she asked skeptically. Naruto chuckled as he recalled his ingenious practical jokes. I painted a clown face on every door of the Yamanaka estate, emptied the pantries of the Akimichi clan, replaced the Nara clan's shogi boards with oil-slick stone tablets, and I put catnip in the Inuzuka's dog food, he listed. Hinata sighed heavily and shook her head. Thievery, vandalization, and several counts of breaking and entering. I'm honestly impressed. You managed to commit 3 crimes and avoid arrest. I suppose the clan heads have every right to despise you. Tell me, why did you never target the Hyuga clan? She asked curiously. The blonde chuckled. I'm a lot of things, but invisible isn't one of them. You guys have X-ray vision. Trying to prank you would be completely pointless. I'd just get a beating for my troubles, he said. The Hyuga heiress conceded a rare smile. It seems that a brain does lie within that dense skull of yours, Naruto-san. You have picked your battles well, she said humorously. The Jinchuriki scowled at the remark, but quickly regained his composure. We should probably get going, he said. Hinata nodded and motioned for the blonde to follow her. Naruto gestured to his attire. I haven't even showered yet, and I'm still in pajamas. Could you let me get ready first? He asked. The Hyuga girl nodded and turned back around. Make it quick. We don't have much time to waste, she said. The Jinchuriki responded by rushing back into his apartment and closing the door. Hinata chuckled as he frantically made his way into his shower, an action that could be heard from his doorstep. His manners are improving. Not quickly, but baby steps are necessary. Naruto whistled as he and Hinata entered the gates of the Hyuga estate. Beyond the extravagant architecture, the sheer size of the property was jarring. It stretched for at least 5 square miles, and the vast majority of it was finely trimmed and well kept. Even their landscaping is perfect. What don't these people polish? The blonde wondered to himself as he was led along by his teammate. As he looked around, he noticed the looks of confusion from Hinata's fellow clansmen. Must be pretty strange to see their future leader bringing the village loser into their home, he thought to himself as he and the Hyuga girl entered the main building. As they walked through the halls, the glares from the clan members became more and more disgusted. Ignore them. They have nothing to do with why you're here, Hinata ordered as she dragged him towards a lavish door. Once they reached it, the Hyuga heiress knocked 3 times and waited. After several moments, the door opened, revealing Hayashi Hyuga. Greetings, father. I have brought Naruto-san. Just as you requested, Hinata said with a bow. The Hyuga clan had nodded and motioned for Naruto to enter the room, which appeared to be a study. To the Jinchuriki's surprise, Hinata stayed put as he entered her father's study. Once he was inside, Hayashi closed the door and sat down behind his desk. Welcome, Uzumaki-san. I see that you're all in one piece. Rather impressive given the nature of your first out-of-village assignment. Quite a wild scenario, really, he said. Naruto nodded and sat down in a chair across from the man. I'm as surprised as you are. I was convinced I was going to die during most of the mission. Hell, I kind of did at one point, he said. Hayashi chuckled to himself. What was it like? Dancing with death, I mean. I've always been fascinated by the concept, but I obviously have other obligations that keep me from exploring, he asked. The blonde thought for a moment before answering. It was odd. I felt like I was waking up from a dream. Like my whole life had been a vivid hallucination. Before I could really understand what was happening, I woke back up again. Sorry if that wasn't too helpful, he explained. The Hyuga clan had nodded. Not a problem. Most people don't remember their near-death experiences especially well. What I've called you here to discuss is what happened after you woke up from your brush with death, he said. The Jinchuriki immediately felt any comfort he had settled into fade away. I figured. I guess you want an explanation of how I beat the hunter? He asked quietly. To his surprise, Hayashi shook his head. I'm well aware of how you did it. Your status as the jailer of the nine-tailed fox has been known to me since you were a small child. Uzumaki-sen, he said. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows. What do you mean? He asked skeptically. The Hyuga clan head activated his Byakugan and pointed to the boy's abdomen. My clan helped create that seal on your stomach. I was aware that the fourth had sealed the beast within you immediately after the attack, so I kept an eye on you. Your childhood is quite well known to me, he explained. The genin raised an eyebrow. Since you already know about the fox, what do you want to talk about? I beat up the hunter using its power, which I can't summon on my own, by the way, he asked. Hayashi smiled and took a sip from a cup of water sitting on his desk. I would like to thank you for saving my daughter's life. You willingly paid the ultimate price for her sake, even though she had been less than kind to you previously. On top of that, you quite literally rose from the dead to prevent her death a second time. You thoroughly surpassed my expectations. And Hinata's, from the sounds of it, he said. Naruto bowed awkwardly. No problem. I just did what you asked me to. Besides, I really didn't want her to die. She can be a little icy sometimes, scratch that, all the time, but she didn't deserve to die for it. Also, what do you mean when you say I surpassed her expectations? He asked curiously. The Hyuga clan head chuckled. She called you by your first name, Uzumaki-san. In the Hyuga clan, using a person's first name is a sign of great respect and familiarity. She also appeared to be slightly less outwardly disgusted by your presence than she has been previously, he explained. The genin grinned. Only slightly. Not much progress, but still a step forward, he joked. Hayashi chuckled and glanced up at the clock that hung on the left side wall of the study. Earning her approval won't be easy, I can assure you, but I think you'll find that it's well worth the pain, he said. Naruto raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. The Hyuga clan had responded by motioning him away with a wave of his hand, a silent order that the blonde immediately followed, exiting the study briskly. Hayashi smiled as he listened to his daughter question the Jinchuriki on the other side of the door. Perhaps I said too much. Oh well. I think my prediction will come to pass. I'm sure of it now. For the last time, I was polite and proper. How many times do I have to tell you that? Naruto groaned. Hinata, who had been bombarding the Jinchuriki with questions for the past 5 minutes, sighed and rubbed her temples. I'm simply making sure. Any insolence on your end could cost me dinner. I would rather not go hungry, Naruto-san, she said. The blonde frowned and poked her in the stomach, eliciting an uncharacteristic squeak from the Hyuga heiress. Are you sure you aren't starving already? You have no fat on you, he said. Hinata turned bright red and scowled at the floor. I diet in order to keep my weight low. Mobility is the core of my taijutsu, so I must be lightweight and flexible, she explained, obviously embarrassed to reveal such information. Naruto frowned at this. You should still eat. Come with me. You're going to eat some ramen, he said. The Hyuga girl turned her glare from the floor to the Jinchuriki. I will do no such thing, she said stubbornly. Her teammate responded by pulling out his wallet. Come on, we don't have all day. I'll pay, he said, turning around and making his way down the hallway as he spoke. Hinata watched him walk away for several moments before finally snapping and jogging after him. Fine. Just this once, I'll humor you. This will not be the norm, so don't get your hopes up, she said haughtily as she caught up with her teammate. Naruto glanced at her and chuckled. I'm only doing this to make sure you don't die of hunger. Even you deserve to eat something with actual flavor every once in a while. Who knows? Maybe you'll even enjoy yourself, he said. The Hyuga heiress glared at him out of the corner of her eye for a moment before sighing and turning her gaze to the approaching gates of the Hyuga estate. We'll see. Shikamaru smirked as he moved his game piece. For the 5th consecutive time, he had defeated Kakashi in shogi. Despite the string of victories, none of them had been as effortless as the Nara had expected them to be. For a man who claimed to have only played shogi 3 times previously, the Jonin was quite a skilled strategist. The silver-haired ninja threw up his hands in a motion of surrender. That's all I've got. You're ridiculously good at this game. Iruka told me that you were smarter than you looked. I didn't believe him at first, but it seems like he was right, he said. The shadow user shrugged and began to put away the game board. I'm just more practiced than you are. For a guy who apparently never plays, you made that tough as hell for me, he said as he gathered the pieces and dumped them into a small bag. He then folded up the board itself and tucked it away in his carry case. After several moments of silence, Kakashi motioned to the window of the cafe they were sitting in, prompting Shikamaru to look through the glass. That's surprising. She doesn't look all that pleased, but she isn't throwing up either, the Nara said as he watched Naruto and Hinata walk down the streets of Konoha, both carrying a cup of takeout ramen. Kakashi watched his students converse and eat their food for several more moments before turning back to Shikamaru. As odd as their dynamic is, I'm glad Hinata hasn't decided to shun him for his status as a Jinchuriki. Naruto needs a friend. Especially a female one, he said. The Nara raised an eyebrow. What difference does it make that she's a chick? Women kind of suck. In my experience, at least, he asked skeptically. The silver-haired ninja chuckled at the comment. Knowing your family's taste in women, I'm not surprised you think that. As for why it makes a difference, it's because women have a way with comfort. They can make you feel worthwhile, he said. The shadow user glanced back out the window, where he saw Hinata scolding Naruto for an unknown sin he had apparently committed. Likely something to do with his still limited manners. Are you sure she's making him feel worthwhile? Looks to me like she's crushing up his confidence and scattering it on the ground like salt in the winter, he said. Kakashi scratched the back of his head as he watched Naruto quietly slurp his noodles while being lectured. Well, she can be nice sometimes, which is better than nothing, he said. They watched the pair for another moment before turning their attention away from the window. I heard that the Chunin exams were pushed back a month. Why is that? Shikamaru asked, changing the subject. Kakashi sighed and leaned back in his chair. Well, the Reikage, who was scheduled to attend this year's exam, was just hit with a charge for violation of human rights. Kumogakure has been disqualified from the testing. Under most circumstances, the exam wouldn't be forced to change dates due to a withdrawal, but Kumo was covering a good portion of the event costs, so we need extra time to prepare, he explained. The shadow user furrowed his eyebrows. Violation of human rights? What did he do? He asked. The Jonin scowled as he recalled the meeting that had been held earlier that week by Hiruzen. He was taking children from various Kumo clans and subjecting them to horrific testing. We don't know why exactly, but it doesn't matter. He'll be behind bars soon enough, he said in a disgusted tone. Shikamaru shuddered. What kind of sicko would do that? To a bunch of kids? Demented asshole, he muttered. Kakashi nodded in agreement. Speaking of the exams, I've been thinking about putting in a recommendation for you 3. Given that you have an extra month to prepare now, I don't think it would be a terrible idea, he said. The lazy genin thought for a moment. Not a terrible idea, but I kind of doubt that any of us can really compete with any of the more experienced genin. Especially me, he said. The jonin shook his head. I disagree. Hinata would almost certainly tool quite a few of the other genin, and if Naruto were to awaken the power he used against Haku, he would maul most Chunin. You're probably capable of finding a way around a good portion of the others too. I like Team 7's chances, he said. Shikamaru shrugged and stood up from his chair. Your guess is as good as mine, I guess. I'm going home for the day. I'll see you around, he said, walking out of the cafe as he spoke. Kakashi watched his student leave and ordered himself a cup of tea. I've got myself a weird group of kids. A Jinchuriki, a clan heiress, and the sharpest procrastinator I've ever met. Not a bad team at all. Hinata silently weaved around another corner, as she quietly trailed Naruto through the streets of Konoha. It was night, and the sky was pitch dark. For the second time, the Hyuga heiress had decided to follow her teammate home. After begrudgingly accompanying the blonde to an early lunch, Hinata had split from him and completed her predetermined list of chores. From cleaning the kitchen to completing basic taijutsu drills, she had kept herself busy for most of the day. As generally productive as the day had been, it had also been quite dull and mundane, with very little interesting happening. Even Naruto's conversation with her father had not been particularly eventful according to either participant. What does it say about me that I honestly prefer days on which I have missions? Hinata wondered to herself as she watched Naruto slowly trek along. Her reasoning for more or less stalking her teammate was much less clearly defined this time around than it had been the first time. The Hyuga girl had simply felt compelled to follow him when she had spotted him walking past the gates of her home at sunset. I feel so creepy. Why am I doing this? This is no more exciting than any else I did today, Hinata thought to herself. Then, as if in scorn of her view of the walk as being boring, something interesting happened. Naruto stopped walking, seemingly noticing something to his left. Out of curiosity, Hinata quietly glanced left as well, spotting a small group of men approaching. They all appeared to be a bit on the old side, with the youngest-looking man appearing to be no less aged than 40 years. They slowly made their way to the blonde, stopping roughly 10 feet from him. Naruto then began to converse with the men. He seemed to be somewhat familiar with them, as he appeared to be unsurprised by their arrival. As the conversation wore on, the men slowly spread themselves out around the Jinchuriki. It was then that the Hyuga heiress noticed an empty sake bottle in the hand of one of the men. Her blood ran cold as Naruto was slowly boxed in. The blonde appeared to sigh to himself as his unwanted company closed in on him more and more. What is he doing? Why isn't he moving? Hinata thought frantically. One of them men then attempted to snatch Naruto's wallet from his right hand, a movement the Jinchuriki easily saw coming and adjusted his positioning to defuse. He was then grabbed from behind by another man. Once again, Naruto defended himself, shucking the villager from his back and backing up. After several more similar sequences, the man who appeared to be the ringleader hit Naruto over the head with his empty sake bottle. The Hyuga girl covered her mouth in horror as the blonde dropped to his knees. What happened next was all too predictable. Naruto was beaten until he gave up his wallet. Once he allowed his billfold to be taken, the men left, leaving him battered on the street. The Hyuga heiress watched with bated breath as Naruto climbed back to his feet. His face was streaked with blood and his ribs were clearly bothering him. He stood silently for several moments before spitting a bit of blood out of his mouth and continuing his walk home. Hinata's self-control finally eroded away. She sprinted out from behind the corner she had been using as a hiding place. Her rapid footsteps alerted the Jinchuriki, who turned around to face her. Naruto-san. Are you? Hinata began, stopping when she noticed the look on Naruto's face. He looked like the absolute last he wanted was to be questioned as to his physical or mental state. What are you doing here, Hinata? He asked quietly. The Hyuga heiress struggled for an answer for several moments before the blonde sighed heavily. You followed me again, didn't you? He asked tiredly. Hinata nodded, embarrassed to admit that she had been trailing him, but knowing that lying was pointless. Yes, I did. I was curious as to why you were out walking so late at night, so I decided to follow you, she admitted. Naruto studied her for a moment before nodding and turning back around. Kind of weird, but I guess that makes some sense. I've got to go get some sleep. I'll see you tomorrow, Hinata, he said, waving goodbye as he walked away. Surprising even herself, the Hyuga girl rushed after him and spun him around by his shoulders. Why didn't you fight back? I know for a fact that you could have easily disarmed those men and gone about your night. Why would you willingly take a beating? She demanded, a mix of begrudging concern and genuine frustration permeating her voice. The blonde sighed. Isn't it obvious? If I even touch these people, I'll end up in jail. Even if the Hokage likes me, the council doesn't, and they would do everything they could to make sure I suffered, he said. Hinata tightened her grip on his shoulders. It sounds to me like you're giving up. Are you just going to be their doormat for the rest of your life? she asked. In a rare moment of anger, Naruto seized her wrists and removed her hands from his shoulders. You don't get it. I don't get the benefit of the doubt. I have to be submissive. I can't afford to fight back any more than I have to. I'd be dead by now if I did. I have no witnesses, no family to back me up, and no money to buy any of those things, he snapped, pain and frustration visible in his eyes. The Hyuga girl flinched at his tone and the close proximity of their faces. Just because I told you a little bit about what happens to me doesn't mean you have the right to judge me or my decisions. What you just saw isn't all that bad, honestly. A cut and some bruised ribs are pretty tame. Go home, Hinata. I'd rather not have you seeing me all beat up anyways, he said. Hinata, to his surprise, refused to move. No, I won't. You're going to explain all of this to me. Where, when, and how often this kind of thing happens. I can help you, she said. Naruto snorted. Let me ask you this then. If you're so concerned, why didn't you even try to help me while they were beating me up? Why did you just watch? He asked. The Hyuga heiress felt her stomach drop. I don't want your pity, Hinata. If you're just going to watch me suffer and then tell me how much it sucks for you to see, then leave me the hell alone. I'm trying really hard to be a good teammate for you. I'm even trying to be your friend, but you're making it so hard, the blonde said, his voice weakening at the final words. He lowered his eyes to the ground and balled his hands into fists. I froze. I wanted to help you. I really did. I followed you because I was worried. I've been thinking about what you said in the Wave Country. That you had been beaten by the villagers. I wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. I failed you, and I failed myself. I'm sorry, Naruto-san. I really am, Hinata said shakily. The Jinchuriki sighed heavily. You didn't fail anybody. Calm down. I've gotta say, it's a little strange that you're so open about being worried about me when you treat me like shit during the day. It's not as bad as it was, but you're still anything but nice, he said. Hinata pursed her lips. I'm not very good at being nice to people, she said quietly. To her surprise, Naruto put a hand on her shoulder. I can tell. We all have problems. I suck at being polite, and you suck at being nice. How about this? I'll try to teach you how to actually be nice to people, and you teach me how to be polite. Agree to that, and I'll forget about this whole thing. Deal? He said. The Hyuga heiress stared at him for several moments. I suppose that sounds reasonable. Once again, I'm sorry for not helping you. I was shocked, and before she could finish her sentence, Naruto pushed a finger to her lips. I don't want to hear it. Just try to be a bit more sensitive, he said. Hinata nodded and grabbed the blonde by the arm, pulling him along in the opposite direction. What are you doing? My apartment is the other way, the Jinchuriki complained as he was yanked through the street. I'm going to patch you up. That cut on your forehead is deep, and it will likely require stitches. Think of it as my first act of kindness, Hinata replied. Naruto opened his mouth to protest, but shut it again. Thanks, Hinata, he muttered as he was led through the gates of the Hyuga estate. She glanced back at him and smiled slightly. You're welcome. Just a warning, we don't use anesthetic when we put in stitches, she said, sounding far too pleased with the idea of painfully threading his wounds. The Jinchuriki began to sweat nervously. That doesn't sound very nice, Hinata. It's not very polite to refuse your hostess hospitality. Naruto wiped sweat from his brow as he ran along the perimeter of Konoha. Kakashi had sent he and the rest of his team out on what he called an endurance run, which meant that they would be running 8 laps around the village. The running itself was effortless, as stamina was and always had been a strength of the blonde. He had completed 4 laps, and he was well on his way to finishing his 5th. Hinata was roughly half a lap behind him, and Shikamaru was another half lap behind her. The distance between he and the rest of his team inadvertently provided the blonde with several minutes of alone time. As he completed his 5th lap, the Jinchuriki's thoughts wandered back to the previous night. The stitching on his forehead would be a steady reminder of what had transpired until the wound healed entirely. The night had been a long one, with a variety of powerful emotions taking hold of Naruto at different points. From his exhausted apathy towards the beating he had accepted to the indignant anger he had felt towards Hinata due to her complete lack of sensitivity. The beating, however, was what had stuck in his mind. Why didn't I just run away? I've done it before, so why was this time different? Why did I dash, he wondered. Before he could finish the thought, another voice cut him off. One that Naruto had only heard one other time. Because, deep down, you feel as though you deserved it, a deep, ancient voice said. The blonde tensed at the voice within his mind, knowing all too well who he was now conversing with. What the hell do you want? I don't remember asking for your opinion, he snapped mentally. The demon chuckled and audibly shifted. I don't need your permission to speak. Besides, you did ask a question. I simply told you the truth, he replied. Naruto scowled and picked up the pace at which he was running. You don't know what you're talking about, he said defensively. The fox grinned within his mind, sensing a point of weakness to pry open. Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Every single morning, you ask yourself why you even bothered waking up. All of your mistakes, all of your insecurity-fueled practical jokes, it haunts you. You took that beating as a form of self-punishment. In the back of your mind, you were disappointed that they left you with nothing more than a deep gash and a bruised rib, he said. The Jinchuriki remained silent for several moments before responding. Just shut up and leave me alone. I would have stopped them if they had actually tried to kill me. They were drunk and angry, but they weren't out to kill, he snapped back at the demon. The fox slowly slid back into his subconscious. Before he disappeared completely, he spoke one last time. I live within your mind. I can read your thoughts. Right now, the heiress dominates your subconscious. Never forget that she likely would have left you to die if those men had decided to try to kill you. Even if you had defended yourself, you still would have been fighting alone. She doesn't care about you, and she never will, he said before fading away and leaving the blonde alone again. Naruto sighed and glanced around at his surroundings. Wait, is that Kakashi-sensei? He wondered as he recognized a figure roughly 100 feet ahead of him. As it turned out, the blonde had increased his pace so drastically during his 5-minute conversation with the fox that he had finished the final leg of his 5th lap in record time. This meant that he had 3 laps left to run. At least I'm more than halfway done, he thought to himself as he passed his teacher, who was sitting on a bench reading his orange-covered book. Once he had completely passed him, he caught sight of the Hyuga estate up ahead. It was as large and imposing as always, with its extravagant gates showing strongly in the morning sunlight. Honestly, I'd rather live in an apartment. Easier to clean, Naruto thought as he jogged past the mansion. After another few minutes of running, he came across an interesting sight. Sasuke, who looked exhausted and irritated, was being gushed over by Sakura. Sitting several feet away from them was Shino, who was quietly observing the situation. As much as I don't like the guy, I do feel bad for him. Can't she just take a hint? The genin thought as he made his way past his former classmates. The scene triggered another train of thought within his mind, which led to a question that he had never bothered asking himself. Why did I ever like Sakura to begin with? Was it because she was smart? I mean, she was well studied, but never all that quick, and she wasn't nice to me at all. She's kind of cute, I guess, but so are a lot of girls. Just a phase. We all have them, he thought to himself. As he trekked on, his thoughts remained on a similar topic, but regarding a different person, and with a slightly different tone. What do I think of Hinata, exactly? I mean, she's kind of a bitch most of the time, but every once in a while, she says something nice. She even cried when I died, so I guess that means she cares at least a little bit. She also brought me a rice ball this morning. I think it was her personal way of saying sorry. I don't even like rice, he thought to himself, chuckling as he recalled the scene from earlier in the day. Come on, I could definitely out-wrestle Kiba, Naruto argued. Shikamaru shook his head and took a sip of water from his canteen. He doesn't play clean. He bites, scratches, and he'll pull your shirt over your head. He did that to me when we wrestled, he replied. The blonde frowned. That's not even wrestling at that point. That's a fist fight, he said. The shadow user shrugged and stretched. Exactly. He out-wrestled me, but I won the fight. I broke his nose and moved on with my day, he said matter-of-factly. Naruto burst out laughing at his words. Man, I didn't think you had a temper. Remind me not to piss you off, he said through his laughs. Shikamaru snorted. I don't have a temper. He said he wanted to wrestle, but then he bit me. So, it's only fair that I do something equally dickish to him, he said in an irritated tone. As the boys conversed, Hinata made her way into the training field, carrying a small object. She briskly walked to the boys and waited patiently for an opening in the conversation. After several moments, she tapped Naruto on the shoulder. Good morning, Naruto-san, Nara-san. I have brought you both breakfast, she said, presenting 2 objects to the boys with one hand outstretched towards each. Why am I only getting a saltine cracker? Shikamaru asked dejectedly. The Hyuga girl shrugged and pushed her left hand, which held a rice ball, towards Naruto. Because I would assume that you actually ate breakfast. Naruto-san did not, she said. The Jinchuriki frowned and stared at the rice ball. How did you know that I didn't eat this morning? He asked skeptically. Hinata fully turned to face him and practically shoved the food into his mouth. That is none of your concern. Now eat, she ordered. Naruto sighed and did as he was told, taking the rice ball, which was practically in his mouth already, and began to chew on it. To his surprise, mostly due to his general dislike of rice products, it was perfectly edible. How is it? I spent most of my morning making it, Hinata asked, practically staring a hole in his skull as she watched him eat, never blinking once as she did so. After finishing the rice ball, Naruto wiped his mouth and gave her a thumbs up. Pretty good. I never took you for the cooking type. I'm pleasantly surprised, he said with a satisfied nod. Hinata, in a rare moment of girlishness, reddened slightly. I am quite capable culinarily. As was my mother, she said proudly. Naruto chuckled at her suddenly positive attitude, an action that was immediately noticed by the Hyuga heiress. She immediately shifted from her jovial mood to one of composure and coldness once more, giving the Jinchuriki a curt nod and jogging off to stretch. Naruto sighed. She's still got a lot of work to do. At least she's trying now. She's kind of creepy when she's trying to be nice now that I think about it. Not quite in the hot way either. More in that stalker sort of way. Then again, she kind of is 1 foot, the blonde thought to himself as he reached the last leg of his run. Naruto slowly decreased his pace to a walk as he reached Kakashi to conclude his 8th and final lap. After he had finished it, he glanced to his teacher. Is there anything else you want us to do today? We already sparred and drilled our basic jutsu, he asked tiredly. The Jonin glanced up from his book and shook his head. You're free to go. Don't get used to short days like this, though. I have a meeting to attend, so you guys benefit. Be ready for something brutal tomorrow, he said before returning his attention to his book. Naruto nodded and walked off to go about his day. After several more minutes, Hinata finished her 8th lap as well, looking much more fatigued than her teammate had. How much did he beat me by? She asked between deep breaths. Kakashi thought for a moment, doing several calculations in his head. 4 minutes 15 seconds? Around a mile and a half in terms of distance. Before you get down on yourself, remember that Naruto, for all of his quirks, is genuinely one of the greatest stamina athletes we've had in Konoha for quite some time, he said. Hinata sighed and sat down on the bench next to her teacher. I know that it's been a little while now, but what did you think of Naruto's display of demonic power against the hunter ninja? She asked abruptly. The silver-haired ninja raised an eyebrow and shut his book. Well, it was less surprising to me than it was to you, because I already knew about the fox. In fact, the whole reason I was worried about continuing the mission once the ante was upped was because I knew that Naruto would likely be cornered at some point. And I wasn't confident in my ability to safely subdue him once he inevitably lost control, he admitted. The Hyuga girl considered his words for a moment. Actually, he was quite composed for somebody whose body was completely overrun with demonic chakra. He was violent and erratic, but there was still a person trapped within his rage. He systematically took Hakusan apart. He took away his ice mirrors immediately by shattering them, and he forced him to fight on his terms. His taijutsu was still far from appealing to look at, but it was tailored to shut down Haku, she said. The Jonin chuckled and gave Shikamaru, who had just arrived, permission to leave. Once the shadow user was gone, he spoke. How did you feel about the transformation? What did you feel like looking at it up close? He asked curiously. Hinata's face contorted with discomfort and a mix of several different negative emotions. It made me angry, and it greatly scared me. I felt as though I was looking at a cheap copy of Naruto-san, who had just given up his life to save mine. I desperately wanted to wake up from the nightmare that was reality. A boy whom I had treated like trash had gotten himself killed for my sake, and then returned from the dead seemingly fueled by the devil himself. It was a lot to process, she said honestly. Kakashi listened attentively, and smiled underneath his mask. He really appreciated your concern. It was the first thing he said to me once the mission was over. For somebody like him, simple gestures of kind and caring go a long way. You clearly aren't all that good at being pleasant, but if you could try to treat him nicely, it would be greatly beneficial for this team, he said. The Hyuga heiress was immediately reminded of her conversation with the blonde the previous night. I'm already working on it. It may take a while though, she said. The Jonin reopened his book and leaned back on the bench. As long as you're trying, I don't care. Hayashi rubbed his eyes as he rounded a corner in his massive estate. It was quite late, and most members of the clan were already asleep. He himself never abided by the tradition of being asleep by 10 o'clock, meaning that his being conscious was not unusual at this hour. What was unusual, however, was the fact that Hinata was putting on her coat and strapping on her sandals. If you need food, we have some in the kitchen. There's no need to waste your time walking at this hour, Hayashi said to his daughter, who flinched and glanced over her shoulder at him. Hello, father. I'm not looking for food, actually. I have something to attend to. I won't be long. I should be back in less than 20 minutes, she assured him. The clan head sighed and leaned against the wall. You're going to follow him home again, aren't you? He asked, not needing to name the individual at hand to get his point across. Hinata remained silent for several moments before nodding somewhat guiltily. I am, yes. I would like to make absolutely certain that he is not harmed on his way home. And if anybody tries, I'll subdue them, she explained. Hayashi sighed sadly as he recalled the previous night, on which a somewhat frantic Hinata had dragged Naruto, who had been sporting an almost comically large cut on his forehead, into the estate. Before you leave, tell me something. What is it you hope to accomplish by being inconsistent? If you wish to gain his approval, you must be steady and stable, not an unpredictable whirlwind of arrogance, and seemingly random displays of kindness, he asked. The Hyuga heiress prickled at his question. I never said I wanted his approval. Why on earth would I want the favor of a lowlife like him? She asked, visibly flinching at her own use of the term lowlife. The clan head shook his head and knelt down next to his daughter, who had settled into a seated position against the wall with one sandal on. Listen to yourself. You hurt yourself just by insulting him for the sake of your pride. Beyond that, you never cook for other people, not even me, and yet you woke up at 4 a.m. to make a single rice ball, something you had never attempted to make before, for him. You may not like it, but you desire to be recognized as a one-half of a positive relationship by him, he said. The Hyuga girl groaned and buried her face in her knees. I don't even know why I'm committing so much time and energy to him. Last night was our second most positive conversation, and it still involved an angry outburst from both of us, she said quietly. Hayashi put a hand on her shoulder. I think I may know why. It's because you're kind. Despite the mask you wear, you dislike watching people suffer. Especially those who already have nothing. Compound that with the fact that you still owe him your life on some level, and it makes perfect logical sense that he would dominate your motivations and consume your energy, he said. Hinata, to his surprise, nodded and stood up. She put on her remaining sandal and headed for the door. That makes sense. I think you may be right. Thank you, father, she said before exiting the estate and jogging off towards the gates. The Hyuga clan head watched her leave and smiled to himself. You've touched her, Uzumaki-san. I'm impressed. Your true test, however, will be what you do now that you have her attention. Kakashi grinned as Naruto snapped Hinata's head back with a hard punch. The Jonin had ordered his genin to spar. The method of matchmaking was identical to the first time they had sparred, with each of them fighting both of their teammates once. Unlike before, Hinata was not utterly dominating her fellow genin. Naruto, at least, was putting up an excellent fight. Shikamaru, who was watching alongside his sensei, whistled as the blonde ripped a hard punch into the Hyuga girl's gut. He's really good at punching people in the stomach. He sucks at literally everything else, but it's working for him right now, Shikamaru commented. Just as the words left his mouth, Naruto was struck in the ribs with a palm strike from Hinata, causing him to cough up a bit of blood and back up. He's a natural when it comes to taijutsu. None of it is pretty, but he has a pretty good idea of what he's trying to accomplish and how he's going to do it. Unfortunately, that lack of polish is costing him big time right now, the silver-haired ninja replied as Naruto was buckled by a kick to the left side of his head. What happened next was a shock to the entirety of Team 7. As the Hyuga girl stepped forward to finish the match, Naruto clobbered her with a hooking punch to the left side of her jaw, taking her legs away momentarily and dropping her to her rear end for a split second. Damn. He sat her down, Shikamaru said, his mouth wide open. Despite the knockdown, Hinata popped back to her feet instantly and attacked with renewed aggression, knocking Naruto to his back with twice as much force. Kakashi immediately rushed to the space between his students. That's enough. Well done, you two. Much better performance than last time, Naruto, he said with an approving nod. To his surprise, Hinata stepped forward and offered a hand to her fallen teammate. The blonde furrowed his eyebrows skeptically, but took the hand and stood to his feet. You actually listened to my advice. You used your left hand, the Hyuga girl said. Naruto scratched the back of his head and grinned. Well, it was all I could hit you with, so I kind of had to. You still served me up, though. You hit hard for such a small girl, he said jovially. Hinata immediately prickled at his words. I'm no smaller than you are. In fact, I may be an inch taller than you, she countered defensively. The Jinchuriki shrugged and dusted himself off. Sure, but I'll bet I'm heavier. How much do you weigh? He asked. Hinata's face flushed red with embarrassment. She shook her head rapidly. I'm not telling you that. You should never ask a lady her weight, she snapped indignantly. Naruto frowned. Why? I mean, it's not like your number would be all that embarrassing. You're in good shape, he said. The Hyuga heiress rubbed her temples and attempted to drain the redness from her face to no avail. It's still rude. There are some questions that you don't ask. Haven't we already talked about this? She asked tiredly. Naruto shook his head. Nope. The only thing you've talked to me about is actually using my chopsticks when I'm eating ramen. Decent advice, but nothing to do with body weight, he said. Hinata sighed. Just don't ask again, okay? Let this be your lesson in etiquette for the day, she said. Naruto nodded and began to walk past the girl to join Kakashi in watching the oncoming match between Shikamaru and Hinata. Before he could pass her completely, the Hyuga girl reached out and seized him by the collar of his shirt, pulling him closer to her. 90 pounds, she whispered before releasing him and turning to face Shikamaru. Her face was still bright red, all the way from the point of her nose to the tips of her ears. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but resumed walking, reaching Kakashi after a moment. What was all that about? The Jonin asked curiously. The Jinchuriki shook his head and winced as Hinata planted her shin across the right side of Shikamaru's ribs. It's a long story that I don't really feel like telling right now. I'll explain it some other day, he said. The silver-haired ninja chuckled. Either way, you had her hot and bothered at the end there. Not sure how you did it, but I'm impressed, he said with a thumbs up. Naruto snorted. No, she was pissed. Anger is her default emotion. Well, that and insensitivity, he said. Kakashi frowned at his words. I don't think I would class insensitivity as an emotion. It's more like a personality trait, he said. The blonde gave his teacher a tired look as Hinata effortlessly evaded Shikamaru's strikes. Is that really any better? He asked. Kakashi thought for a moment before shaking his head and pulling out his orange-covered book. Not really, but you asking how much she weighed was exactly sensitive either, you know, he pointed out. Naruto shrugged. At least I had a reason to ask the question, he said. The Jonin smiled under his mask at the comment. And she actually answered you too. Not sure why, though, he said humorously. The pair then lapsed into silence as Shikamaru was slowly pummeled. After a few minutes, Kakashi decided that he had seen enough, despite the shadow user having remained vertical the entire match. That's enough, you two. Hinata is the winner, he called out to his students. They immediately ceased fighting and jogged their way over to Naruto and Kakashi. As you all know, the Chunin exams are in a little more than 3 weeks. I'm planning on entering all 3 of you. Last year's exams were some of the most violent in recent memory, with Sanigekure utterly dominating the competition. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how competitive you are, they're going to be competing again this year. As such, I want you all to be well prepared. Shikamaru, Hinata, I've already spoken with your families, and they'll be handling around 70% of your training. Naruto, you'll be with me. We'll still have group sessions, but only in the mornings. The rest of your time will be spent with your clans, except for you, of course, Naruto, he explained once they reached him. The group nodded. For now, that's all I've got for you all today. It's going to be dark soon, so I'd suggest getting dinner or something like that. Breakfast won't be a good idea tomorrow, because I'm going to make the most of our sessions from now on, the Jonin said. At this, the genin began to walk away. The silver-haired ninja observed the children as they trekked on. As they grew smaller and smaller due to the distance between them, Kakashi smiled. At least one of you is going to become a Chunin. The best part is that I'm not sure which. Naruto yawned as he made his way out of the training field. As Kakashi had said, it was beginning to darken, and it wouldn't be long before it was pitch black. The day had been fairly uneventful, save for sparring, which was as hectic as it always was. I actually managed to knock her down today. I'm not sure how, but I did it, Naruto thought to himself proudly. Then, as if on cue, he was tapped on the shoulder. Good evening, Naruto-san, Hinata, who had tapped him, said. The blonde chuckled and turned to face his teammate. You saw me 5 minutes ago. You don't need to be so formal, he said. The Hyuga heiress ignored his comment and continued speaking. You and I are going to have dinner. Come, we don't have all night, she commanded abruptly. Naruto frowned as he was tugged along. You're not even going to ask if I want to have dinner with you? Because I don't really want to eat out, he said in an irritated tone. Hinata glanced back at him over her shoulder, her expression softening slightly. Please, she said quietly. The Jinchuriki studied her skeptically for a moment before allowing himself to be pulled along. What's her deal? He wondered as they rounded a corner. Eventually, Hinata led him into a small cafe in the northern sector of Konoha. By the time they walked through the door, it was completely dark, with only the half-moon to illuminate the night. Once they were fully inside the small establishment, Hinata directed Naruto to a small table in the far right corner in the back on the dining area. I've never even seen this place before. How'd you find it? The blonde asked as they sat down across from one another. Hinata shrugged and thanked the server, who handed her a drink, but predictably opted to let Naruto go thirsty. Excuse me, ma'am. Would you mind extending any services you provide to me to my companion as well? The Hyuga girl asked, her tone bordering on anger, but not quite. The woman flinched and glanced over her shoulder. Why, yes. Forgive me, Hyuga-sama, she said before scurrying back to the kitchen to retrieve a glass of water. Hinata then returned her attention to Naruto. I come here regularly. As you said, it's quite difficult to find, so it's almost never busy. In fact, I may be what is keeping this place running monetarily, she said, answering his earlier question. The Jinchuriki nodded. Quiet and empty. Reminds me of you, he joked, well aware that he was walking a fine line. Hinata raised an eyebrow, a subtle smile spreading across her lips. It seems that myself and your skull have quite a bit in common, she retorted. The blonde laughed out loud. So you can joke. I should insult you more. You're more fun when I do, he said between laughs. The Hyuga girl narrowed her eyes at the comment. Go right ahead. See where it gets you, she challenged dangerously. Naruto instantly felt the atmosphere shift. He quit laughing and put up his hands defensively. Just a joke. You don't have to threaten me. Like I said before, loosen up a little, he said. To his surprise, Hinata did not immediately snap back at him. Instead, she gave no response at all, opting to simply stare at him blankly. The blonde sighed and snapped his fingers, shaking her from her apparent trance. Quit doing that. You scold me for being rude, but last time I checked, staring at people isn't exactly polite, he said. Hinata lowered her eyes to the table and mumbled an apology. Naruto's already present frown strengthened. Why is she being so subdued? This isn't like her at all, he wondered to himself. The server then returned with his water and waited expectantly for their orders. Hinata ordered a stick of dango, and Naruto ordered a bowl of ramen with a rice ball on the side. Once the server left, Hinata finally spoke audibly. What are your thoughts regarding the Chunin exams? Do you believe that our team is ready? She asked. The Jinchuriki thought for a moment before answering. I think we'll do fine. Your eyes are great for tracking, and you're slick as hell in taijutsu. Shikamaru can think his way out of just about anything, and I'm apparently immortal. I like our chances, he replied. The Hyuga girl nodded and took a sip of her water. I believe the survival portion will be effortless. Our cell is well-rounded and offensively capable. We shouldn't struggle all that much with finding ways around whatever they send our way. What concerns me, however, is the one-on-one combat that we will be required to participate in. I mean no offense to you, but there are two people that I don't think you're capable of beating as you are, she said. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Who would these people be? He asked curiously. Hinata pursed her lips and pointed to the Hyuga crest on her sleeve. One of them is my cousin, a member of the branch family, Niji Hyuga. He, alongside myself, is the most talented child of my family's current generation. The second is likely Sasuke Uchiha, but I have my doubts about that after today, she said. The blonde nodded. What gives you doubts about Sasuke? Not that I disagree with you, because I don't, he asked. The Hyuga girl turned her head and showed him the right side of her jaw, which was bruised. You have a natural talent for taijutsu. As blessed a punch as it may have been, you still knocked me down. A feat only accomplished by my father before today, she said. Before Naruto could respond, the server returned with their food. The pair decided to put their conversation on hold to eat a few bites of their meal. Elbows off the table, Naruto-san, the heiress ordered. The Jinchuriki grumbled, but did as he was told. After a minute or two of eating, Naruto spoke again. I'm pretty confident I can beat Sasuke. He was always stronger than me by a little bit in the academy, as much as I hate to admit it, but I think I've grown enough to take him down. I don't know enough about Niji to say whether or not I think I would have a chance, he said. Hinata lightly chewed her dango and studied her teammate. If I may say so, I believe that the version of you that fought against Haku-san post-revival would chew up and spit out any of our fellow genin without any trouble at all, she said. Naruto shook his head. You're probably right, but I won't be using the fox's power if I can help it. I don't want to maim anybody, he said. The Hyuga girl chuckled. I still find it absolutely incredible, Naruto-san. What you did in the Land of Waves, I mean. You committed voluntary, enemy-assisted suicide, died, and then rose to batter the man who had killed you. Quite a feat, she said. Naruto shrugged and took a bite of a rice ball on his plate. I was operating on another gear. I don't even remember half of what I did, he admitted. Hinata sighed, seemingly out of relief. The pair went on to discuss several other topics before finishing their food and exiting the restaurant. I enjoyed that more than I thought I would. Thanks, I guess, Naruto said once they were out in the street once more. Hinata nodded and put up the hood of her jacket as a cold wind blew. When she didn't respond verbally, the blonde turned and began to walk. I'm going home. Have a nice night, he said, waving once as he walked. After a moment of peaceful travel, rapid footsteps caught the attention of Naruto, who glanced back over his shoulder. Did you forget something? He asked Hinata, who had jogged to catch up with him. She shook her head and fell into step beside him. No, I'm going to walk you to your apartment, she said. The Jinchuriki opened his mouth to protest, but shut it again when he received a hard glare from the Hyuga girl, who was clearly in no mood to argue. After several minutes of uneventful walking, they reached the stairs that lead to Naruto's dwelling. They ascended them and reached the door, where the blonde turned around to face Hinata. Why were you so bent on walking me home? That's kind of out of character for you, he asked skeptically. The Hyuga girl tensed at the question, turning her gaze to the floor. I was simply being polite. If I'm to teach you how to be cordial and proper, I need to follow my own advice, she said. Naruto shook his head and closed his front door, which he had opened a moment previously. Or was it because you were afraid that I would get mugged again? He asked. Hinata sighed and nodded her head dejectedly. Yes, it was. I know that you don't like the idea of being coddled, but I feel awful about sitting idly by while you were attacked. I wanted to make absolutely certain that you weren't harmed. That you arrived home safe and sound, she admitted quietly. The Jinchuriki smiled. Is that why you dragged me out to get dinner? To give yourself an excuse to walk home with me? He asked. The Hyuga heiress gave a barely detectable nod, her eyes still downcast and her face contorted with guilt. Naruto then surprised both of them by sliding an index finger under her chin and lifting her face. Hey, look at me. You don't have any good reason to feel bad about what you did tonight. I really appreciate it, Hinata. That was really sweet of you, he said reassuringly. Hinata stared at him wide-eyed. She had never trekked onto such personal grounds with another living person before, and it was showing. You don't need to say anything. Just try not to stare so much. It's kinda weird, the blonde said with a chuckle. He then released his gentle grip on her chin and opened his door to enter his apartment. Before he closed the door, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. By the way, your rice ball was a hell of a lot better than that cafe's, he said before closing the door and slipping inside. Hinata's cheeks and ears gained a pink tint as she watched the door. After a moment, she smiled and folded her hands over her chest. Good night, Naruto-kun. Hinata flopped onto her bed and sighed. It had been an excessively long day of drilling, and she was utterly exhausted. Every part of her body hurt, from her knees to the joints in her fingers. The Hyuga girl was used to such soreness by this point, as her training regimen had always been brutal, as was expectable for the future leader of the clan. As she caught her breath, she rolled over onto her stomach and rested her chin on her hands. I'm making progress. This pain is worth it, she thought to herself as she stretched her back and rolled over onto her side. The group sessions with Team 7 were tame when compared to her clan-specific training, and much more enjoyable. It had been 3 days since the arrangement had been made, and all 3 of the days had been marked by the same pattern. Hinata would wake up at 6 in the morning, make her way to the training grounds, lightly bicker with Naruto about either etiquette or taijutsu, complete her drills, and then leave. From there, she would return home and spend the rest of the day training with Hayashi. I wish my sessions didn't run so late. I never have time to watch, she thought to herself, somewhat embarrassed by her own train of thought. Her mind then returned to the place it had routinely journeyed to over the past 72 hours. I wonder if he heard me? I don't think he did, but it would be quite embarrassing if it were the case, she wondered. The occurrence her brain was referring to was the conversation she and the blonde had partaken in outside of his apartment 3 days prior. During said conversation, Hinata had, albeit once the encounter was more or less finished, attached an affectionate honorific to the end of his name. As frustrating as it may be proved to be in the long run, Naruto-kun's density comes in handy every once in a while, she thought humorously. The Hyuga heiress then smiled as she allowed her mind to focus on one detail of their conversation in particular. He likes my cooking, apparently. Perhaps I should make something else sometime, she thought to herself. As she was imagining these things, the door to her room opened, revealing her sister, Hanabi. Somebody looks tired, she said as she stepped into the room. Hinata nodded and sighed, cracking her neck several times. I am. Drilling was absolutely hellish today. Understandably so, but a painful experience nonetheless, she said. Hanabi chuckled and sat down on the bed next to her sister. She then poked Hinata on the cheek. Warm-faced, are we? What's on your mind, elder sister? She asked with a wry grin. Hinata tensed slightly, but calmed immediately. Nothing like what you're thinking. As I said, training was difficult, and I'm still warm from it, she said, her tone holding a subtle underbelly of defensiveness. Her sister giggled and tilted her head to one side. Would this happen to have something to do with why you arrived home so late several days ago? She asked with a grin. The Hyuga heiress shook her head rapidly, her face now red. Hanabi laughed out loud at her usually astute sister's girlish reaction. It does have something to do with that. Oh, how scandalous, Nasan, she teased humorously. Hinata sighed and buried her face in one of her pillows. Leave me be, Hanabi. I don't want to talk about this right now, she said tiredly. Hanabi patted her on the back and laid down next to her. You could at least tell me his name, she said. The Hyuga heiress rolled over onto her back and glanced at her sister. Naruto Uzumaki, she said quietly. Hanabi raised an eyebrow at the response and frowned. I mean, no offense to you, but that seems like quite a poor choice. I've seen him here with you several times, but I never suspected that you were, she began. Before she could finish, she was silenced by a glare from Hinata. I would prefer if you didn't pass judgment on him without having fought alongside him first. I understand your concern. I too considered him to be a wretch, but he has proven me wrong. He is quite admirable, she said. Her sister studied her for a moment before speaking. You sound awfully conflicted despite the compliments you're giving him. Why is that? She asked curiously. The Hyuga heiress drew her knees up to her chest and rested her chin on them. I don't know how I feel about him at all. On the one hand, I do find him to be quite irritating, but on another, he has proven himself to be reliable, good-natured, and shockingly intelligent. Every once in a while, he can even be sweet, she said quietly. Hanabi furrowed her eyebrows. It sounds to me like your feelings are quite straightforward. You desire him. Even the people you greatly appreciate are going to get on your nerves from time to time. Just accept the fact that you wish to lock him in a dark room, and she said. Hinata managed to slap a hand over her sister's mouth before she could finish the sentence, but the message was still clear. No, nothing like that. I would never do something so unbecoming. As for my feelings being straightforward, you're right in that they should be, but they aren't. I treated him like an insect for the vast majority of our mission during the Land of Waves, and yet he still gave up his life for me. Even after all of that happened, I still treated him poorly, to the extent that I left him to be beaten in the street when I could have helped him, she said, her voice weakening a bit at the final sentence. Hanabi gave her a sympathetic look and patted her on the back. It sounds to me like you feel unworthy of him. Like you don't deserve to be treated kindly by him after your indiscretions against him. I must say, I feel quite the same about a boy I've been interacting with. It's a difficult feeling to get over, she said. He's been shockingly forgiving. He even claimed to enjoy the rice ball I made, she said, a trace of happiness returning to her voice. Her sister's eyes widened. Wait, that's why you were cooking at 4 a.m. the other day? I just thought you were hungry. That is just adorable, she said with a grin. The Hyuga heiress sighed as Hanabi giggled. You mentioned a boy that you felt guilty about treating poorly. It sounds to me like you and I are in similar positions. What's his name? She asked curiously. The young Hyuga ceased her laughter and reddened a bit. That's neither here nor there, Nasan. Konoha Marukun is none of yours, she said, only realizing her mistake once the sentence was 80% complete. It was Hinata's turn to laugh, which she did. Oh, little sister. You have such a loose tongue. Don't worry, I'll keep this quiet for you, she assured Hanabi as she laughed. The young Hyuga sighed in relief. At least I have the free time to fix my mistakes. Good luck, Hinata Nezen. I hope this all works for you, she said before hopping off the bed and exiting the room to prepare herself to sleep. Once she was gone, Hinata smiled and tucked herself under her covers. I think I'll make dango tomorrow morning. Let's see if we have the same taste in food. Shikamaru rubbed his eyes as he sipped on his water. He glanced to his left at Naruto, who was consuming noodles at an absolutely breakneck pace. There were at least 7 bowls piled on the counter of Ichiraku's ramen stand, and the pile was only going to grow at the rate the blonde was eating. I get that Kakashi-sensei worked you hard today, but is it really necessary to eat a literal ton of ramen? You're going to puke, the shadow user asked tiredly. Naruto nodded and continued to eat. After roughly 30 seconds of ravenous eating, the Jinchuriki spoke. He made me run up 100 trees 3 times each. On top of that, he made me spar him a few times, so I'm a little beat up too. Today sucked. I've earned this, he said as he ate more noodles. Shikamaru sighed. That sounds rough. All I did today was practice using shadow possession and do some basic taijutsu drills. I still had to deal with my mom though, so I'd still trade with you if I could, he said. Naruto finished his bowl and stacked on top of his other 7, bringing the total to 8. I'll bet neither one of us is being worked as hard as Hinata. When you come from a family that famous, they've got to have some insane standards for you to meet, he said. The lazy genin nodded and rested his chin on his hand. She's probably doing what we should be doing and getting sleep. She, like you said, probably needs it even more than we do, he said. Naruto ordered another 3 bowls of noodles and yawned. You know, she's actually a lot nicer than she comes off. Well, maybe nice isn't the right word. More like thoughtful. She forced me to go to dinner with her a few days ago, and it turns out she was trying to make sure I didn't get beat up on the way home, he said. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. That's really pretty sweet. If only she was like that day in and day out, he said. The Jinchuriki rubbed his eyes and nodded in agreement. I know, right? I've been trying to give her pointers on how to be nice, so maybe that'll help in the long run, he said with a shrug. The shadow user finally folded and ordered his own bowl of chicken-flavored ramen. She doesn't seem like the type to take advice from someone her own age. Especially a teammate, he commented. Naruto sighed and twirled his chopsticks. Yeah, she's not super coachable. I think she's trying, though, which I appreciate. She has a bad habit of staring at people, so I'm trying to get her to do that less, he explained. Shikamaru chuckled. You do realize that she only stares at you, right? It isn't really a problem if it's purely isolated to one person, which it is, he replied. Naruto's eyes widened. Wait, really? That's even weirder, honestly. I should talk to her about that, he said. The shadow user shook his head and grinned. No, leave it be. I think you'll like where this all leads if you do, he said wryly. The Jinchuriki, at the height of his metaphorical density, gave his teammate a look of confusion. What's that supposed to mean? It stresses me out when she tries to burn a hole in my skull with her eyes, he asked. Shikamaru snickered. At least she isn't looking any lower. She could literally undress you with her eyes, he thought to himself humorously. At the thought, the lazy genin burst out laughing, earning a glare from his oblivious teammate. What's so funny, lazy ass? He asked dangerously. The shadow user shook his head and tamed his laughter to a low chuckle. Nothing important. Still, don't point out that she stares at you only. Trust me, it'll mean good things for you, he said. Naruto remained silent for a moment, clearly racking his brain to decipher the reasoning behind his teammate's advice. Eventually, he gave up and nodded. Fine, I'll keep my mouth shut, he conceded. The boys continued to discuss various topics until the clock struck midnight, prompting them to go their separate ways for the night. Luckily, despite the lack of a silent, pale-eyed girl watching over him from the shadows, Naruto walked through the door of his apartment unscathed. Kakashi took a deep breath as he jogged around the perimeter of Konoha. It was roughly 2 in the morning, and the Jonin had been completely unable to sleep, prompting him to go for a nighttime run to settle his mysteriously jittery nerves. Naruto is a fascinating person to work with. He's clearly talented in a variety of areas, and much smarter than you would think he is. What I can't put my finger on is why he struggles so much with Genjutsu. He has the chakra for it, and his control isn't that bad, he thought to himself as he passed the Hokage monument. His thoughts then wandered to upcoming exams. Matchup-wise, I think all 3 of them should be fine. The only 3 people that are overly threatening to them are Sasuke, Neji Hyuga, and Rock Lee. Even then, Naruto might be something of a nightmare for Sasuke at this point with the amount of clones he can create, and his taijutsu is getting much better. Hinata likely loses to Neji, though. Then again, all 3 of them lose to Neji as they are now, he contemplated. Kakashi continued to dissect and analyze the individual matchups one by one, poking holes in the tactics and strategies of the opposing genin. Lee is problematic for Shikamaru due to the speed difference, but if he can survive for long enough, I would trust him to figure something out. Hinata might carve Lee up early, but once again, the speed would be an issue. Naruto and Lee is fascinating, but Naruto would need a way to badly hurt him to win, he thought with a frown. Suddenly, an idea manifested in his mind. He stopped running and held out his left hand. Rasengan, he said quietly. After a moment of silence, a swirling ball of blue chakra formed in the palm of his hand, a humming sound accompanying it. The Jonin smiled underneath his still-present mask. I was planning on teaching Hinata Chidori at some point, because I'm pretty sure I know what her chakra nature is, but this one could be a perfect fit for Naruto. Yes, I think this'll work, he thought. He allowed the sphere to fizzle out and continued running. Naruto is going to love this.